Welcome to another one of my videos. You can help support this channel by subscribing and liking, and by grabbing my free ebooks. I'll leave a link in the upper right hand corner and in the description to my website. In today's video, you'll be listening to the audiobook AabiLynn's Dragon Rite #1, Breaking Dawn Riders. If you haven't listened to the first story in the series, I'll leave a link in the upper right hand corner and in the description to AabiLynn's Dragon Rite #0 so that you can listen to it before you listen to this one. If you would like to purchase the ebook AabiLynn's Dragon Rite #1, Breaking Dawn Riders, I'll leave a link in the description to my website. So now sit back, relax, and enjoy the read.
AabiLynn's Dragon Rite #1, Breaking Dawn Riders, Those Who Are Chosen and Those Who Are Cast Off, by Kristie Lynn Higgins. Copyright 2014-2019. AabiLynn, Woman of a Sorrowful Song. Prologue. Long ago, the Stygian Legion, an army of warlocks, moved against the land of Athenia during the first reign of men. The Stygian Legion, under the command of King Vis, who wanted to enter the land so he could steal a large jewel and open a doorway to the void, a world of demons, battled the Athenia royal army. The warlocks and King Vis would have conquered Athenia if not for the dragons aligning with tribal men and forming the army. Their combined forces of magic and steel repelled the advance of the Stygian Legion, and King Vis returned to his kingdom empty-handed and defeated. Now during the third reign of men and a time of peace, young humans were brought to Wyvern the Dragonlands, the homeland of the Athenia dragons. The young humans participated in the first ceremonial acts of the Dragon Rite. They would select an egg and raise the hatchling. During one of the Dragon Rites at Firedrake, a small pale egg was laid and none of the boy candidates would claim it, so it was to be cast off. Cara, a 12-year-old slave girl, flung herself on the egg to save it from being destroyed, knowing she had no real power to stop its destruction. Chapter 1. The Cast-Off. Moments earlier, Dragon Elder Duran, the great yellow dragon, stood within the quickening chamber and asked the boys who hung onto their eggs, "Are all candidates set on their choice?" They all answered, "We are." "It is a pity," Dragon Elder Duran stated to Syllabary, who stood beside him as the dragon looked over the small pale egg that no one had laid claim to. Dragon Elder Duran spoke. "We have not had a rejected egg in nearly 100 years. It shall need to be removed. Call forth the relegator," he commanded. One of the dragons, who guarded the Dragon Queen, walked to one of the connecting tunnels and screamed a dragon call, and after some time, a large man entered who wore a black leather mask to conceal his face, and he wielded a large weapon. "Which one?" the relegator asked. "The small pale one," Dragon Elder Duran answered as he motioned to the egg near his clawed feet. The relegator approached the egg as Cara watched in horror. They were going to hurt the egg. Cara took a few steps forward. The relegator was only a few paces away from the egg as he stomped across the ground in his slow but determined stride. Dragon Elder Duran noticed she left the ritual room, entered the quickening chamber, and moved towards the egg, and he turned in her direction as the relegator stood over the pale egg and lifted his weapon above his head. "Do not let him," Cara whispered. "Do not let him hurt him." Tears streamed down her face, and before she knew what she was doing, Cara had limped over to the small pale egg, flung herself over it, gently covered it with her body, closed her eyes, and screamed out, "Do not kill it. Do not hurt this baby." Cara braced herself to receive the blow from the relegator's weapon. She knew that once she was hit, that most likely, she would die or wished she had met death. Cara tensed and awaited the blow, but nothing happened. She tightly encompassed the egg with her body and tried to protect it as best as she could, thinking the relegator only delayed as he tried to figure out how best to kill them both with one strike. The blow still never came, and Cara slowly opened her eyes as her heart thumped in her chest. Everyone in the room had turned and looked at her, and a few of the boys snickered. A wicked grin spread across Turk's face, and he shouted, "Stupid wench, what are you screaming about? You are so useless and foolish." Dragon Elder Duran stepped to her and asked her, "Yes, what are you screaming about?" She thought the dragon would eat her for interrupting the Dragon Rite, so she didn't answer him. "Tell me," Dragon Elder Duran urged her as he repeated, "What are you screaming about?" She knew she couldn't hold her tongue, so she pointed to the relegator and told the great yellow dragon, "I do not want him to smash the egg. He has a right to live. You should not cast him off to death. Cast him off to death. Smash the egg." Dragon Elder Duran repeated her words, glanced at what the relegator held, thought about what it might look like to a small human girl, and then he told her, "He is not here to smash the egg. The pole he carries is to pick up the egg, though I can see where someone, who did not know what he was doing, would surmise otherwise. The mallet-like end is to rock the egg to release it from the sticky substance that makes the egg cling to the floor. The other end of the pole is to lift the egg and carry it out. You see, child, no one is to touch the egg unless they are a candidate and have selected it. You are not going to kill the baby, she asked as if she didn't understand the great yellow dragon's explanation. We do not kill our young, Dragon Elder Duran told her. We are not barbarians. A tiny smile of relief appeared on her face until the rest of what the great yellow dragon had told her sunk in. And then Cara repeated his words. No one should touch the egg. She leaned away from it, fearing how her master would react to her grave though genuinely misguided mistake. She also feared what the Dragon Elder would do to her. And Cara frantically said, I am sorry. I did not understand. I thought you were going to kill the baby. She peered around at the many faces that seemed to jeer at her. And then her eyes fell upon Turk, who reveled in her squirming. Cara would receive a beating once her master had her alone. And who knows what she would receive from Turk. Blasted girl, Bork shouted as he marched up to her and yanked her so that she fell back to the rocky floor. I should never have brought you. You are useless. He turned to the dragon and calmed himself a bit. And then Bork said, Forgive me, Dragon Elder. She shall be severely punished. I am also sorry, Dragon Elder Duran told him as he watched how the human treated the younger human. He stated, the damage has already been done, and it cannot be undone. Bork panicked. Her actions might have jeopardized the tribe's chances at the dragon rite. This was the first time his tribe was permitted to participate. He feared her actions could cause his tribe to be banned forever, and he yelled, Damn girl. In his temper, Bork lifted her and tossed her to the dragon's feet and told the Dragon Elder, Here then, she is yours to do with as you please. She is no longer mine and is now subject to your authority. Duran eyed the man with his serpent-like eyes, and then he said, I want to make sure I understand. Are you giving me your slave to exact judgment upon her? I am, Bork replied. She is yours to do with as you please. Bite her head off if that is your wish. The Dragon Elder leaned his large yellow head down to her. He could tell she was very afraid of him, but she seemed more afraid of the man behind her. The Dragon Elder questioned her. What is your name? I am called Girl, she replied, for that is what Bork had taught her to say. It had taken her many years to unlearn her name. That is not what I asked you. Dragon Elder Duran spoke as his nostrils flared. His sign of anger wasn't directed at her, but the man and his harsh treatment of his slave. The dragon repeated his question. What is your name? She sat there for a while, frightened and confused. It had been so long since anyone had called her by it that she had almost forgotten her name, but she had kept it tucked in the back of her mind. She glanced back at Bork to see what he would do, but he just stared at her as if he wanted to beat her. No, worse than that. He looked as though he wanted to kill her. She turned back to the great yellow dragon and answered him. Cara AabiLynn. Cara AabiLynn, do you understand what must happen now? Dragon Elder Duran questioned her. She glanced back at Bork again, and she then answered the dragon. I must be punished. She thought more about what she had done and how Bork reacted, and then she added, I might be killed by you for disturbing the dragon rite. His nostrils flared again before he stated, Then you do not understand. Dragon Elder Duran positioned his tail between the human girl and the man, and then he explained, By touching the egg, you have selected it, but you are not one of the candidates, so this does place things in an inauspicious circumstance. The egg would have simply been cast off, and the hatchling inside would have been raised by its mother, but since a human touched it, the bond they would have established can no longer be made. What shall happen to the baby dragon now that its mother shall not take it? She asked. A very good question, Duran stated. If you had been one of the candidates, it would have been simple enough, but you are not. This has never happened at Firedrake since recorded history. The Dragon Elder faced the Venetian red scribes on the observer dais and questioned them. Has anything like this ever occurred at the other dragon nests? 3 of the 4 Venetian red scribes shook their heads. Syllabary, who stood close to the great yellow dragon, spoke up and replied, Not that I have ever heard of. The nests are so careful of whom they allow within the ritual room and quickening chamber. Useless girl, Bork angrily muttered. If you cause the Northern Grass Plains tribe to be banned from future dragon rites, I shall. Be quiet, Dragon Elder Duran commanded. She is no longer your concern, so you should have no more say in the matter. Bork wanted to argue with Duran, but instead, he stomped away from the Dragon Elder and the girl, not sure he could restrain his rage and not act out against her. He moved to where the other patrons stood. Syllabary questioned the great yellow dragon. Would you like me to contact the other nests and see what we should do? I think that is best, Dragon Elder Duran replied. For now, until we have an answer, we shall have the 2 of them removed from the quickening chamber. Syllabary commanded, Mrs. His convey scroll shook, the page went blank, and then he commanded his scroll. Relay this message to all Venetian red scribes at any dragon nest. Syllabary took his blazing quill and wrote out Duran's inquiry, and when he finished, he commanded, End Mrs. The message he inscribed on the scroll magically relayed to the convey scrolls at all the dragon nests, and then he told the dragon elder, "It is done." Duran looked at the girl and the small pale egg, and then he sighed before he added, "It is a pity we must have this egg removed. For once it is removed, the hatchling can never participate in the dragon rite." Cara realized what her blunder had caused the baby dragon and couldn't remain quiet, so she yelled, "No, do not take it away because of me. Let it stay. Surely one of the candidates shall select it. It is not too late." The dragon elder heard the sincere appeal within her earnest pleads, and though he knew the outcome of the request he would make, he would go ahead and do so for her sake. He told her, "I can at least ask." Duran raised his voice and questioned those in the quickening chamber. "Do any of the 15 candidates choose to leave their egg and attach themselves to this small pale one? If so, come now." The boys glanced around at one another and none of them moved forward. Syllabary started back to the observer's dais, and his convey scroll trailed behind him along with the blazing quill he had released. He walked up the rocky ramp, and he happened to glance into the bestowal basin when he was about halfway up. He took a second look, walked back down the rocky ramp, then up the 3 steps to the middle ground, and gazed into the bestowal basin. "Dragon Elder Duran, how many candidates did you say there was?" he asked the great yellow dragon. "There are 15 this year. I count 16 gifts within the bestowal basin," Syllabary stated, and then he looked them over and relayed. "There are 3 silver coins, 3 diamonds, 3 gold marbles, 3 emeralds, and 4 rubies." "What do you mean?" Duran questioned him as he moved to the middle ground. The dragon elder looked into the bestowal basin and stated, "There should only be 3 rubies." Duran didn't touch the gems, but he carefully examined them with his eyes. One of the gems was larger than the others, had a different red hue, and was uncut. The dragon realized his earlier mistake, turned to the girl, and commanded her, "Cara AabiLynn, rise and come forward." She meekly approached the dragon elder and the scribe, not sure what fate she would find with them. They had discovered she placed the bloodstone inside the basin, and even though it wasn't entirely her fault, a non-gift had been placed inside, so she knew some sort of punishment must be coming. She bowed before them on her knees once she walked up to the middle ground. Duran's face softened before he spoke. "Forgive me, Cara AabiLynn. You are not a thief as I had first thought, for the item you had in your hand was not one of the rubies, but a bloodstone." He looked over the girl and saw how she quivered before him. He didn't understand the circumstances that had brought her this day to meet this auspicious fate, but maybe it was all meant to be. Maybe it was time to break down some barriers that the humans within the area of Firedrake had created. Dragon Elder Duran smiled a big toothy grin as he told her, "This does change everything. The moment you placed the bloodstone within the bestowal basin, you became a candidate, and so you had the right to select an egg. The hatchling does not need to be removed, but he may remain along with you, for you must train the hatchling so that he may attain the breaking dawn." "Train him?" Cara uttered. "I do not understand. I am a slave and a girl. How can I?" "I do not understand either," Bork interrupted her as he moved and stood before the middle ground. "You said that the violation has already been done. How can you now say that she is a candidate?" "Violation. Not exactly my words, but I do see how you could have misunderstood them." Duran lifted his head, turned to him, and stated, "It is simple. You brought 4 candidates into the dragon rite. Now all of them have selected an egg. She is not a candidate," Bork insisted as he walked up the 3 steps. "She is a worthless slave and a crippled child. She cannot be a Dracoman. She has done none of the studies, has no idea what is required of her. She is a girl, and she has presented no precious gift." He peered into the basin and said, "She merely dropped some stone in the basin." Duran thundered, "It is not your place to tell us who can be a Dracoman or Dracowoman." Steam shot from his nostrils. Then he calmed himself, and he continued, "The rule of boys only is not our mandate but each of your tribes. Actually, only this nest has no female candidates for the dragon rite. Cara has selected an egg and no one but herself can remove her from the first few acts of the dragon rite until it is finished." He snarled, holding back the urge to bite off his head as he said, "Human, do not presume you can tell us who can or who cannot be within this rite. And as for Cara's gift, she has presented a bloodstone. It is one of the most precious things found in this world." He asked Bork, "Do you know what a bloodstone is?" He shook his head. The dragon elder informed him, "A bloodstone is the last droplet of blood that leaves the body of a wounded dragon as the dragon dies. The stone is the testament of its existence and holds the power, wisdom, and dreams of that dragon. The bloodstone she placed within the basin is very rare and is worth more than all the gifts the candidates have given today. It is actually worth more than all the gifts ever given at Firedrake since the dragon rite was established." Bork didn't want to hear the words of the dragon elder, and he argued, "She is my slave, and what I say." Duran roared, interrupting him, and Bork paled at the furious display of the great yellow dragon. "Are you saying you are not a man of your word?" Dragon Elder Duran questioned him. "What do you mean?" Bork inquired. "Did you not say she is mine to do with as I please? Did you not give her to me?" Bork glanced at his son, embarrassed to have him witness his chastisement, turned back to the Dragon Elder, and replied, "I did say is so." "Then what this girl does or does not do is no longer your concern." Dragon Elder Duran ordered. "Cara, stand." She stood, trembling before the great yellow dragon. "As your new master, I want you to speak truthfully to me. Shall you take responsibility for this egg?" She glanced at it, seeing how helpless it looked, and she answered, "I shall." "Then it is settled. The relegator may leave. There is no more need of him." The large man left the way he came in. "The patrons are ordered to leave as well," Duran spoke. "They may return in 5 fortnights or sooner if we summon you in at that time. You may take the candidates who do not complete the 4th act of the dragon rite." Bork glared at Cara, and he looked as if he wanted to rip off her head. She had never seen him look at her so, and then without another word, Bork turned and left with the other patrons through the tunnel leading out of the ritual room. The Dragon Queen also left, leaving through one of the tunnels that exited the quickening chamber, and she went to rest in her den. For the next night or two, Dragon Elder Duran began. "The candidates shall stay with their egg until it is hatched, and then once the hatchling emerges, those candidates who have selected it shall be shown a room where they and the hatchling shall stay the remainder of the first 3 acts of the dragon rite. Your duty shall be to bond with the hatchling and help it along until it achieves the breaking dawn." He looked at Cara, making sure she heeded his next words as he spoke. "Any hatchling who does not achieve breaking dawn, that is, the hatchling's first flight within the allotted time, shall be disqualified from participating in the next section of the dragon rite." Cara looked back at her egg. She had taken on so much responsibility. It was overwhelming, and her mind fell into what seemed like a maelstrom of incertitude and disquietude. Cara wondered if she could do this. Could she raise a baby dragon and help it learn how to fly? She knew nothing of dragons and even less of flying. Still, Cara moved over to the quickening chamber, placed her hand tenderly on his shell, and whispered to the egg as she leaned her head against its shell, "I believe in you. You can be anything you so desire, with hard work." Duran continued, interrupting her thoughts. "During this part of the dragon rite, you are to stay awake and not leave your egg's side. Fall asleep and you risk losing precious time with your egg, which may allow another candidate to take your hatchling. Use this time to form a bond with your hatchling. This point is very important, for only one human shall bond with each dragon. And remember, your selection does not need to be exclusive." He faced the girl who was now his slave and told Syllabary, "This turned out better than I imagined. Maybe if we had more Dracowomen among us, maybe their presence would inspire our queen to give birth to a female during the next dragon rite. The tribal men of this region are stiff-necked. Maybe this slave girl shall change their minds, and they shall allow their daughters to participate in the next dragon rite." He faced the scribe and questioned, "But was it right of me? Can one as herself become a warrior? How shall she fight? Her dragon shall depend on her shield and spear." "I have no answer to that," Syllabary stated. "I guess I shall worry about that later." The Dragon Elder said, "Her egg still must hatch, and the hatchling must fly. There is so much she does not know." Bork was right about that. She does not have the knowledge she needs. She seems determined, but shall it be enough? "Again, I have no answer for you," Syllabary stated. And then he said, as he reviewed the log he had written of the dragon rite, "Her name does seem familiar for some reason, but for the life of me, I cannot figure it out. It seems you have another item to look into when you have some free time," Dragon Elder Duran told him. And then he and the other 2 dragon elders left one by one out of the quickening chamber and headed for their dens. "I do, indeed," Syllabary spoke as he and the other scribes stayed behind to record the hatching event. Chapter 2. The Brood Hatches. Dragon Rite Terms. Talon, the hand or foot of a dragon. Claw, each finger or toe of a dragon's talon. The second act of the dragon rite began as the first act ended. The first act entailed the placing of the candidate's gift and then the selection of an egg. The second act would be the vigil of the egg until it hatched, and none were supposed to sleep during this time. Cara watched as the dragon elders left through the quickening chamber, and then she glanced behind herself as the last of the patrons left the ritual room. She heard Bork's grumblings echo through the tunnel he stomped through, and she also heard some of the other men agreeing with his remarks. Cara knew they must be talking about her. Bork hated that Dragon Elder Duran allowed her to participate in the dragon rite. She just didn't know what frustrated him more. Was it the fact that she was a girl, or was it the fact that she was a slave, or was it the fact? Cara glanced at her stunted left arm, and then she put those thoughts far from her mind. She had to focus on the egg and the baby dragon within. She would worry about Bork another day. The 5 eggs had been laid by the Dragon Queen in somewhat of a line, starting with the big murky black egg at the far end closest to the wall all the way to the small pale egg near the center almost parallel with the middle ground. The eggs had been spaced quite a distance apart from each other to make room for large groupings of candidates. Firedrake was the smallest nest of the Athenia dragon nests. Most nests would have 2 to 3 queens lay eggs during the dragon rite and have about 100 to 200 candidates, both boys and girls, attending. Cara looked back and up from her spot in the quickening chamber to the 4 Venetian red scribes standing on the observer's dais, who recorded the events of this part of the dragon rite. The light from their convey scrolls and their blazing quills lit up the area around the middle ground in a fiery glow. Cara thought that their jobs must be somewhat boring to have to write down nearly every detail that they observed. She looked at each of the scribes and expected to see solemn or dull expressions while they worked. But the 4 scribes in their own way seemed to be enjoying their toils. Cara never liked one moment of her life as a slave. Would the life of a Dracowoman make her happy? Would she find some sort of place to belong here at Firedrake where people cared for her? The noise of the other candidates brought her thoughts back to the task at hand. Cara turned to the boys gathered around the other eggs to see what they were doing to give herself some idea of what she should do. Some of the boys were only stroking and rubbing their faces on the shell. There were other boys who were talking to their egg and encouraging him to wake and come out to them. And then there were boys like Turk who were somewhat yelling at their egg, demanding that the hatchling come out and become their dragon. Those boys also spoke to their hatchling, telling them all their accomplishments, from their brave acts of killing certain fierce beasts to what standing they had within their own tribe. Cara had none of those things to tell her baby dragon, but she didn't feel that she needed to. She only needed to encourage the baby dragon and let him know that she would be there for him. She held onto the small pale egg as if it was Hetty, a female Highlands wolfhound that belonged to Bork. When Cara, a 5-year-old frightened child, first arrived at Bork's hut, she found no comfort with him, his wife, or any of his children. At least when she lived with her father, she could cling to Helen and stay close to her, echoing a mother-daughter relationship. The resonating love and affection of Cara's heart might have resounded in a greatly diminished reply, but at least the small incidents of unintended affection were there, even if it was just when Helen would carry her, bathe her, and help her eat her meals. At Bork's hut, Hetty was the only creature she could find companionship and comfort with, and she would, on many a cold night, curl up with the large furry dog. Cara didn't know what she would have done if Hetty hadn't have been there when she first arrived. The large Highlands wolfhound treated her like one of her pups, and she seemed to be always at Cara's side. Hetty died when Cara turned 11, and she bawled as if Hetty had been her mother who'd passed on. Since that time, Cara's loneliness nearly drowned her in a sea of darkness and despair, until one day she started pretending that Bork and his wife had adopted her as one of their children and that they both loved her dearly. Cara held onto the egg as if it was another chance for her to have a family. A real family of flesh and bone, not one that the light of morning easily vanquished. Cara would make sure he knew that she loved him and she would never abandon him. So she spoke softly to him, encouraging the baby dragon within to come out. She promised the hatchling that she would do her best to care for him, that he could count on her through good and bad times, and that she would help him attain his breaking dawn. As she made all of these promises, she thought about how she would teach the baby dragon to fly. She didn't know the first thing about flight or dragons, and Cara wondered how she would accomplish all the things she promised if she was a dunce when it came to all things dragon. Most of the boys appeared to know what they were doing and were very excited about the dragon rite. Cara was becoming more and more terrified of her lack of knowledge. There were too many things she didn't know and too many things she feared she wouldn't be able to do because of her lack of physical strength that her arm and leg failed to endow her with. Time went on and drew along with it her doubts, as if the passage of time somehow slowly fed on her insecurities, and time decelerated as it fattened up on her anxieties. Cara realized she was only letting worry win, and as long as it was her focus, worry would continue to win. She was here at Firedrake, and all she could do was try, so she must. Cara watched the boys and mocked some of the things they did to their eggs. She stroked the shell and talked to him some more. She noticed that the other eggs between hers and the large murky black one would at times move, but her egg never did. It remained still and lifeless as the melon it resembled. Cara tried not to be discouraged by this and focused her hope on the baby dragon that would soon enter her world and make it a better place for her. She also prayed the world wouldn't be harsh to him as it had been to her. A commotion brought her attention to the light blue egg as its shell cracked, and the boys, who had selected it, let out excited cheers and encouragements. The light blue egg became the first hatchling to hatch. The baby dragon was the same color as its shell. He wobbled to his feet and flapped his wings, looking at each of the boys who had selected him, and then the hatchling licked them with his forked tongue. Cyan told the other 2 boys with him as he picked off pieces of the shell still attached to the hatchling, "We need to name him. How about Sky? one of them said. That is a good name, Cyan said as he petted the hatchling's head. He shall be called Sky, for soon he shall be soaring through it. A female human attendant came in and showed the first group of candidates and their hatchling to their quarters. The room quieted to silence when they left. Then the other candidates glanced at one another. A panicked look crossed their faces as they knew the start of the race had begun long ago. And then they hurriedly started talking to their eggs to coax them out. Next, Barman's purple egg hatched, and the baby dragon was named Tyrion. The third egg to hatch was the copper one, and he was named Dirk. They and their groups were escorted out of the quickening chamber. Each time a group left, a scribe followed until only Syllabary remained along with Cara and her egg and the murky black egg, and its candidates. The late afternoon, evening, then late night went by, and twilight of the next day broke, and still the last two eggs had yet to hatch. Cara didn't know what she should do. She was so tired that her eyes drooped, but she knew she couldn't fall asleep. Not until her baby dragon had hatched. Cara pinched herself through the long hours and would get up and walk around the egg, still touching it with her tiring yet hopeful hand. She didn't know what to do to draw her baby dragon out. Then she remembered what one of the candidates said to another as they left the quickening chamber. He said that he reached out to his hatchling and connected with him. Cara understood him to mean that he reached out and called with his heart instead of his voice and somehow reached his baby dragon. How would one do such a thing? Cara knelt back down to the egg on knees that were sore from resting on the stone floor for so long. She closed her eyes and wrapped her arms around the egg. Cara had to be careful not to fall asleep as she held this still and quiet position. She remembered Hetty and how she could get a sense from her that she also cared about her. So she searched for that same sensation. Minutes went by, and Cara couldn't get a sense of the baby dragon within. Maybe she was doing it wrong. Maybe it wasn't so much a mental connection but one of the heart. So she reached out with her heart, looking for a soul that must be as kind and gentle as hers. At first, she didn't sense anything. So she decided she was trying too hard and still was using her mental muscle. She needed to let go of her doubts and fears and let her heart be the one to work and search for the kindred spirit. Cara's body gave into exhaustion. She fell asleep, and she entered the world of dreams. She stood on a grassy hill with one large tree beside her. Cara recognized the tree to be a silvery blue oak, a very rare tree found only in Athenia that she had heard in stories told to Bork's children. The trunk and branches of the oak were cobalt blue in color, and its leaves were silver. The green grass around her stood as high as her knees. The sky above her was clear and sunny, and she could see for miles from the high hill. Cara knew she was dreaming, and within this realm of freedom she had escaped to many times before. She connected with her baby dragon, the one that would be hers and no one else's. The connection was small at first, as if they tried to hold hands, palm and talon, over a great distance. It was as if she stretched out her arm for him, and he stretched for her thousands of feet above her in the air. Cara urged the baby dragon to come down to her as much as she urged him to come out of his shell. She urged him to hatch and become her dragon, and she told him in the dream that together they could overcome any obstacle. The egg beneath her in the waking world slightly rocked, and her soul leapt for joy. She couldn't stop now, so she continued to encourage him, feeling as though she had nearly reached him. Cara felt that she almost bridged the gap between her and the baby dragon, and that they could soon hold hands in reality. The egg rocked again, and this gave her the will to stretch out with her soul even more. And she nearly reached the tip of his claw when Turk's excited outburst distracted her. Cara's mind came whirling back from the grassy hill as if a strong torrent had pulled her away and flung her into the quickening chamber. "He's coming," Turk shouted as he stepped back from the big murky black egg and nearly knocked down a boy. "My dragon's coming." All the other boys, who were also touching the large egg, stepped back as it started to crack. A large crack split the egg in half, and the hatchling's head peeked out. "Help him out," Turk ordered the other boys. They worked on releasing the hatchling from his shell, and once they finished, a large sleek dragon stood before them, a little wobbly on his large talons. He was as tall as Turk, and he peered around as if he was confused and disoriented. The hatchling started to move away from the candidates as if he would run away from them, but they all grabbed on and kept the hatchling from leaving them. "We should name him Midnight," one of the boys suggested. "I like that name," one of the other 6 boys said. The hatchling hiccuped twice, and a black flame shot out about a foot each time. The boys marveled at the sight. Not only was their dragon a fire breather, but his flame was dark. "His name shall not be Midnight," Turk stated. "His name shall be Blackfire." Syllabary walked over to them and questioned them. "Did that hatchling spit flame?" "He did," Turk answered. "I did not know dragons could breathe fire." "Some dragons do, but Athenia dragons do not," Syllabary answered. And then he muttered to himself, "I should tell Dragon Elder Duran of this." He started out as another attendant entered, and the male human attendant escorted the 4th group out. leaving Cara and the pale egg alone. She glanced at the egg and then looked at where the other eggs had been. Cara nearly coaxed her baby dragon out but lost the connection when the large dragon was born. She didn't know if she would have the strength to try again, but try she must. Cara took a big breath to gather what energy she could. And then she closed her eyes. She was exhausted from staying up with the egg all night, and the warm air of the cavern didn't help keep her awake. Cara was so tired that she didn't notice someone approached her. Not until he was standing over her. "I know what you did, girl," Turk barked. She jumped, startled by his voice. Cara glanced around and found that no one came back with him. No one would come to her rescue if he decided to do something to her. She sat as still as she could like a baby deer among the grass. He knew she was afraid of him, and he reveled in her terror. Turk leaned close and whispered into her ear, "You humiliated my father in front of everyone. I shall not forgive that. Do you think you are safe here? You are not. When you least expect it, I shall repay you threefold. Maybe I shall have my dragon eat you." She said nothing as he threatened her. There was nothing she could do. She was a slave, after all, and he was much bigger than her and he carried a sword. "I shall make you pay dearly for humiliating my father and for humiliating our tribe with your mere existence." He yelled at her, then grabbed her long unkempt brown hair and pulled back her head so he could stare into her terrified face. He told her, "Most likely your dragon shall not hatch, and then what a predicament you shall be in. You shall be a slave to a dragon. Dragons do not have slaves, or at least, have slaves very long. You see, they eat them. Dragons eat their slaves. Your hatchling shall not come, and then your new master shall eat you." He straightened and released her hair, and then he added, "And I am going to be there when the dragon elder eats you." Turk realized he had been there too long and rushed after his group as he shouted over his shoulder, "Heed my words, wench. One way or another, you shall not be a Dracowoman." The quickening chamber filled with his words as if they had substance. They seemed to rip her spirit from her body as if she had already failed. She tried to shake off the feelings, but they wouldn't leave her. They clung to her and embraced her with their cruelty. Cara was tired of it. She was tired of being belittled. She was tired of being hurt by words and fists. She realized this little egg was her way out. If only she could get the hatchling to fly, then everything would work out for her. First, the baby dragon had to be born. "I shall not believe him, and I shall not cry," Cara told herself. "What he said is not true. Dragons do not eat humans." She tried to convince herself by speaking, "Dragons do not eat humans, and my hatchling shall come. He shall come, and I shall love him and teach him to fly. I shall become a Dracowoman. Is that not right?" She stroked the shell as a tear trickled down her cheek. And then she said, "We shall be the greatest guardians Athenia has ever seen. I believe in you. All you have to do is believe in me. So believe in me and come out. Be bold and venture into this world. I shall be here waiting for you. So come. Please come." Noon came and went. An attendant brought her some water, cheese, and bread. Cara gobbled it down. She was very hungry, for she had no breakfast or much of anything to eat the day before. She nodded off but woke to the sound of her own self sobbing for some nightmare she had. Cara couldn't remember the dream, but it was horrible. She fell asleep again, and this time she woke to the sound of dragons. Cara heard them as they screeched to one another and when they would fly off and land. She also heard the different groups of boys in what sounded like play. She thought that was odd since all of them were past the age of children's games. But then she thought maybe they were training their hatchlings already. "Can you hear them?" she asked her egg. "They have already started their training. You need to come. You need to come so we can train. There is much you need to learn. There is much I must teach you." She also added, "There is much I need to learn before I can teach you." Night approached again, and she had nodded off more times than she could count on her fingers. And as more time passed, fear rose up in her. Fears that she was having trouble quieting. Would her egg ever hatch? Was her baby dragon alive in there? Did she only imagine he moved when she was dreaming about the silvery blue oak? The air was warm and her immediate surroundings were quiet. Nothing stirred but her doubts. She talked to herself to help keep herself awake. Maybe Turk is right. Maybe my egg shall never hatch. What shall I do then? What kind of life shall I have as a dragon's slave? Shall he be a good master or shall he be like Bork? When she had nearly given up all hope that the dragon would emerge, the shell cracked. The pop and crackling sounds were the most wondrous things to her ears. More of the shell cracked, and a small nose pressed against her hand. Remembering what Turk had shouted to his group, Cara started removing pieces of the leathery casing. The hatchling was smaller than she thought he would be, and he barely moved. He was paler than his shell, and his wings looked like withered maple leaves. Cara didn't care about any of that. She was so happy that he had finally come. Excited and overjoyed at his appearance, she stroked his head. The hatchling peered up at her, and then he looked all around as if looking for someone. He seemed to become upset when he didn't find them and called out several times in tiny baby dragon squawks. Cara thought he was looking for his mother and felt a pang of loss for him. "There is nothing to fear," she told him as she cradled him in her arms. I am here for you, and I shall not leave your side. There is no power in this world that can make me leave your side. Dragon Elder Duran entered the cavern along with Syllabary as Duran voiced his relief. I thought I heard the sounds of a hatching egg and then the cries of a young one. And I see the last hatchling has come. What is his name? His name? Cara repeated as she smoothed a hand over his rough hide. She thought for a few moments, and then she replied, I shall call him Bold. He shall have to be to face this world. Dragon Elder Duran examined his stunted wings, and then he stated, they are small even for his size. You should know that he most likely shall not fly. Do not speak such things. Cara snapped as she covered the hatchling's ear holes. For the first time, she peered into the great yellow dragon's eyes, and she did this with fervent conviction as Cara declared, there is nothing he cannot do. Do not let him hear you speak such a thing. She composed herself, realizing her tired body made her quick-tempered. Her tone wasn't as strong as she asked, do you hear me? Do not say he cannot do something before he has even tried. You are correct, Dragon Elder Duran spoke, and then he grinned, noting she had some backbone. But is this the tone a slave should have with her master? Her face went pale, paler than Bold's hide, and she nearly flung herself to the ground. And she would have if she hadn't been holding the baby dragon. She begged, forgive me. Cara diverted her gaze to the floor as she spoke. I should not have raised my voice to you. It is only. She removed her hands from Bold's ear holes and said, I was told many times that I could not do things because of the way my limbs are. And because they said it, for a long time, I thought it was true. Words are as hurtful as the back of a hand and more damaging than a sword. True, child, but I was not trying to be cruel, only honest. And as for forgiving you, there is nothing to forgive, he stated. What Cara thought was a female human walked in. Go with this attendant, Dragon Elder Duran told Cara. She shall show you to yours and Bold's quarters. Eat and get some rest. You shall need your strength for the upcoming challenges. Even for a hatchling that has adequate wings, attaining breaking dawn in the allotted time is no easy feat. Cara stood with Bold in her arms and started to follow the woman. But then she started. Master. She turned to the great yellow dragon and felt he was different than her old master. And she questioned him, is it true dragons eat humans? My kind are meat-eaters, but I can only speak for myself. I have lived a long time, and I have only eaten one human. Oh, she didn't expect that answer, and she uttered, I. Cara realized how different he was. Unlike Bork, he could devour her with a few great chomps. She started again, I. What was there to say but, good night, master? She followed the attendant, not knowing what else to say. Good night, he told her as he watched her leave, and once she left the quickening chamber, he questioned Syllabary. What was I thinking to take on a slave? I know I wanted a female human to participate in the dragon rite, but Syllabary turned to his old friend and saw a twinge of sadness in the dragon's eyes. The dragon elder continued, I have not had human companionship since my Dracoman passed on to the spirit world. It has been decades since then. The memory of the man he once fought alongside warmed his 3 hearts. And he stated, I shall not have to worry about it if her dragon is able to fly. Can she help the hatchling achieve his breaking dawn? Those wings of his. He paused as the girl's words reverberated in his mind. And he stated, if she heard what I was saying, Cara would be yelling at me again. But what if she does fail? I guess she can rub my ears at night and make me that tea the humans drink. He started toward his den, and Syllabary followed him with his own question. As we were discussing before, what of Blackfire? Your kind are magic users. You do not breathe fire, and yet he does. What could this mean? I am not sure. Perhaps the fire is part of his magic. Dragon Elder Duran replied as he lowered his head so he could enter a tunnel. Only time shall tell. You can send word of this to the other nests. Maybe this has happened at another, and they can give us guidance on how to proceed. This has been a very unusual first 2 acts of a dragon rite. Syllabary spoke. What can we expect from the remaining acts? Chapter 3. A bond that shall never break. Dragon rite terms. Sphinx palm is used in measurement and is equal to 13 inches. The attendant led the sleepy Cara out of the quickening chamber, and the tunnel cooled the further they journeyed away from the cavern. Cara could barely move after all that time waiting on her baby dragon, but seeing him sleeping in her arms so peacefully gave her strength, and she slowly followed the attendant. My name is Winfrey, the attendant introduced herself. She was plump and a sphinx palm taller than Cara. Winfrey said, I shall assist you, Cara, and the hatchling in your needs during the dragon rite. She paused at an opening in the tunnel wall, parted a curtain, motioned within, and said, this shall be your quarters. There is fruit within, a pitcher of water, and a covered bowl for the hatchling. The bowl shall have a foul odor to it. It is regurgitated mountain goat from the queen. Really? Cara spoke as she made a face. Yes, he shall eat this until he reaches breaking dawn and can hunt on his own, Winfrey told her. There is a bed for you and a sand bed for the hatchling. The sand is heated by underground steam, so be careful. It shall be hot. She paused as Cara walked past her into the quarters, and then Winfrey questioned her, "Is there anything else you need?" "Thank you, no," Cara replied as she stepped into her small room and stared at it as if it were a palace. She never imagined when she woke early that one morning at Bork's hut that she would be given a bed of her very own to sleep in and food that she could eat whenever and as much as she liked. Cara told her with uncontained joy in her voice, "I do not need anything else. This is all I shall ever need. I do not know about that, but what is here should get you through until tomorrow. Here, wear this," Winfrey told her as she handed her a necklace, and then she instructed her, "Blow this whistle if you have need of me, and I shall come." Cara took it and placed it over her head as she asked, "Do all candidates get a whistle?" She picked it up and blew into it, and then she stated, "I do not hear anything." Winfrey covered her ears as if the sound had been too loud, and then she slightly snapped, "Please, do not do that when I am so close." "You heard that?" Cara questioned her, and then she started, "No human could." She put a hand to her mouth to halt her rude utterance as she realized Winfrey wasn't human. She had never met anyone but humans. No, that wasn't true. She had met dragons, and now whatever Winfrey was, what race could she be? She looked so human. Winfrey pretended not to hear her comment or her earlier question, and she stated, "You need to feed your hatchling and get your rest, and once you both have rested, you shall need to strengthen your hatchling. You are striving to have him attain breaking dawn at a much earlier age than what is normal for them. So you shall need to push him to work." "Is that what I heard earlier?" "I heard the other candidates shouting as if they were playing games." "It could have been," Winfrey replied. "Now, listen to me. All the hatchlings shall want to do is sleep, so you shall have a big challenge ahead of you. You shall need to find a way to motivate him into working, and do not treat him like a beast of burden or a dog. They are like you humans and need to be treated with respect, or one day he may turn around and eat you." Cara chuckled as she looked at the snoring Bold. She couldn't see him eating a mouse, so she had a hard time imagining him eating her. Cara realized her laughter had escaped her usually guarded mouth. She was ordinarily so careful around Bork and Turk. The slip could have been because she was so tired, or that she felt she had more freedom here at Firedrake. Her cautiousness took over, and she tried to hide that the outburst had occurred. But it was too late. The attendant folded her arms as she stared at her. Cara shyly peered up at Winfrey as she pressed her lips together, trying to stifle another outburst. Winfrey's heart melted at the sight of the girl, and she cracked a smile as she spoke. "I guess that threat is not as effective with this little one." Winfrey petted Bold's head as she said, "It was much more effective when Blackfire's attendant told this to the candidates he had charge over." She gently grabbed Cara's elbows as Cara cradled the hatchling, and she told her, "Much responsibility has been given to you. You shall have to push him to attain his breaking dawn." "I shall try," Cara told her, and then she added, "I shall do more than that. I shall make sure he attains his first flight before my time is up." "Good answer. Now rest well," Winfrey said before walking off. Cara glanced around the small quarters that seemed huge to her. She usually slept on the floor near the fire in Bork's hut, wrapped up in a ragged blanket. Cara moved about the room, and there on the floor by the door was a small table. In the back of the room on one side was a bedroll already spread out, and on the other side was a pile of sand. She went to the table, grabbed an apple, bit into it, and then munched on it greedily. Bold made a hungry noise. Cara stroked his head, quickly finished the apple, and grabbed the cloth-covered bowl. She placed it on the floor near the pile of sand and uncovered it. Winfrey was right. She spoke to Bold. "This smells like yak vomit." She placed Bold on the floor, and he crawled over to the bowl and ate his fill. While he ate slowly, Cara devoured a pear and a small bunch of grapes, and then when she finished, she saw that Bold had fallen asleep in the bowl. Cara went and picked him up, cradling him again in her arms. "Look how marvelous you are," Cara told him as she reached down and kissed him on the top of his head. He opened one eye, stared at her for a moment or two, and then went back to sleep. "You shall be a courageous dragon, and I shall be a brave Dracowoman. We shall band together and become a wondrous team. No, we shall be more than that. We shall be family. We shall be a family that cares and looks out for each other." She stroked his leathery back as she spoke softly to him. "My Bold, my brother in arms against the world who believes we cannot accomplish much. We shall show them. We shall show them what we are made of." She walked over, placed him on the hot sand, and then went herself and collapsed into her furnished bedroll. She stared up at the ceiling as a hope she hadn't embraced in a long time warmed her soul. She remembered the dream of the grassy hill and the silvery blue oak. She remembered the sensations she felt within it. Firedrake would be her new home, and she found someone who loved her as much as she loved him. Cara remembered no more of that night, but her mind did take her back to that grassy hill with the tree, and within the dream, she sensed that her hatchling reached out to her again. He wasn't as close to her as he had been when she held onto his egg, but she could still sense him in the blue sky above her. It was almost like he bided her this time to join him on the winds. She didn't remember much more of the dream. Chapter 4. The first day of new freedom. The next morning, Cara was up and eating breakfast. She was used to waking alongside the sun when she belonged to Bork, and though her experiences the 2 days before wore her out, knowing she had Bold by her side refreshed her small, weary body. Winfrey arrived and delivered a new bowl fresh from the queen. Steam rose from the bloody meat. Cara took it and thanked the attendant. Winfrey left. Then Cara placed the bowl on the floor near Bold, and he didn't stir. She picked him up from the hot sand and placed him on the floor near the bowl. Bold grumbled his complaint, lifted his small frame, and went back to the sand bed. "This is not going to work," Cara stated. "Maybe some fresh air shall help you wake up. My sleepy Bold." She grabbed a satchel that had been provided for her and stuffed it with fruit from the table. She placed the strap over her head so that it crossed her chest, and then Cara grabbed him and the bowl and headed out the curtain. When she entered the tunnel, she felt a breeze on her cheek and headed in its direction, not knowing exactly where she was going. The tunnel traveled up, and she followed it until the tunnel opened up to a cliff covered in yellow-brown sand. She peered out across the vast area around her, and she realized this was the back of Firedrake, and not the area they had ridden into and stabled the horses. Finger mounds filled the desert valley, and they were more of a reddish color than the surrounding orange-red canyon. The large oval canyon surrounded the tall appendage-like protrusions. The valley was huge and had nearly 100 different-sized finger mounds, and dozens of dragons and mounted dracomen and a few mounted dracowomen filled the area. Many of the dragons climbed the finger mounds to their top, and then they took flight from them. Cara walked halfway out to the edge of the cliff. She was too afraid to go any closer. She set Bold and his bowl down, hoping the surrounding dragons would inspire him to eat. Awake from their trip, he went and ate his breakfast. A little braver, Cara edged herself a few steps toward the edge to peek over, but she was still too far away to look down. Movement caught her eye, so she looked in its direction and at one of the smaller finger mounds across from her. Cara saw Turk and the other candidates in his group trying to persuade Blackfire to fly off their cliff. They were pushing the hatchling's hindquarters, but he wouldn't budge. It appeared to her as if Turk was screaming bloody hell at everyone, including his hatchling. She could make out a few of the things Turk was yelling at his hatchling. "You shall not have your breakfast until you fly, so do not try to go back inside. Flap your wings, my dragon. Flap your wings and fly, for your meal shall grow cold if you do not hurry." She felt pity for Turk's hatchling as she turned and moved a few steps away from the cliff. Cara watched Bold eat as she thought about how much smaller he was than the murky black brute. His size didn't matter to her, only his heart and the courage she knew that was inside of him. They would become a great team, no matter what the others thought. "I wish you would fly to me right now and show the candidates just how wondrous a dragon you really are," she spoke, encouraging him. "I wish you would flap your wings and come to me, my brother in arms." Bold paused and glanced back at her, and then he returned to his breakfast and continued eating it at his very slow pace. She sighed, and then she stated, "I wish you would show as much interest in training as you do in sleeping and eating. I wish." A young dragon's enthusiastic shrill drew her attention and frightened her for its intensity as it seemed to resound in her mind. Cara looked back to Turk and the other candidates and discovered the shrill had come from Blackfire. His demeanor had changed, and he looked eager instead of hesitant to fly. "Looks like Turk or someone in his group has finally inspired their hatchling," she told Bold. "If I can strike up the nerve, I should ask one of them what they had said or done. Do not worry. I would not withhold your food if that is how they did it." Blackfire stared in her direction with a hunger-filled intensity that seemed to declare his intentions. She glanced behind herself and realized he must have caught scent of Bold's breakfast that he was taking his time eating. She turned back and Blackfire spat flames and flapped his wings. The boy stepped away as Turk tried to climb on his back. Blackfire bucked like a horse, throwing Turk from him, and then Blackfire ran toward the edge. He leapt as if jumping over, and at first, Cara thought the hatchling had failed and plummeted to his death, for they were quite a ways up. She gathered her courage and moved toward the edge to peer over, but before she reached the edge, he flew up and landed in front of her. She stood there for a moment, not knowing what to do. Cara thought Blackfire would turn around and head back to the boys who were screaming for him, but if he came for Bold's food, she doubted their calls would win over his stomach's grumblings. Blackfire tilted his head and looked at her with serpent-like eyes that were the same color as her bloodstone, and then he looked at Bold. Her dragon ignored the hungry brute. He flew. Turk shouted as he fisted both of his hands and raised them in the air in excitement. "My dragon flew. Call him back," she beckoned Turk. "Call him back before he eats my dragon's food." "What are you yelling about, wench?" Turk shouted to her. "Are you ordering me around? Your head has enlarged since your dragon hatched if you believe you can order me around. Do not ever believe you can order me around, wench." He turned his attention to his dragon and ordered him. "Blackfire, Show her what I taught you. Blackfire took a step forward and bared his fangs at her. Cara froze as she remembered what Turk had told Barman about the Leviathans. He said that they used Death's smile right before they gobbled someone up. Blackfire's aggressive action sent terror hurling toward her as if he had flung a spear. She took a step back, remembering more of the stories Turk had told about the Stygian Legion's Leviathans. His murky black hide reminded her about their legend, and all she could picture was this great ferocious beast trying to eat her. Blackfire took another step toward her, and she took 3 back, kicking Bold's breakfast. The bowl went hurling backward, spilling its contents. Bold grumbled his complaint and moved to the spilt meat. For a moment, she thought about grabbing Bold and fleeing. But Cara knew she couldn't outrace a dragon of his size. She doubted she could outrace a dragon of any size. Blackfire lowered his head and stared at her with his penetrating blood-red eyes, and Cara froze again. She couldn't move, terrified the brute was going to eat her, and at his size, he wouldn't be downing her with one gulp. He would have to tear her apart and eat her bit by bit. He bared his fangs at her again. Then she heard whispers, and at first, she couldn't make out what was being said to her. But then 6 words became clear. Mine. Small arm wench, he seemed to speak to her without words. Then Blackfire glanced at Bold with an angry look on his face, and he seemed to speak again. All mine. Cara remembered the whistle and lifted it to her mouth and blew. She heard nothing, but Blackfire acted as if he had heard something. He took a step back from her, looked at his candidates, turned back to her, and had an infuriated look on his face. Moments later, Winfrey came rushing out. You called for me? Her attendant questioned, and when Cara didn't answer her, Winfrey asked, what is going on? With someone else there, Cara was finally able to move, so she turned, ran to her, and hid behind the attendant. Blackfire snorted, glanced at Bold, and took one last long look at Cara, and then he flew back to his candidates. What is going on? Winfrey repeated. Cara started near fright. Hey, Blackfire had not done anything to her yet, so what could she say? She calmed herself and finally replied. He flew. He did, Winfrey said. That is amazing to achieve breaking dawn so early in the dragon rite. Winfrey looked over to the flying hatchling, and then she faced her and questioned her. But why did you call me? It is not your hatchling that flew. Cara stood there trembling. As a slave, she learned early that no one was going to come to her rescue, and that whatever her masters did to her she would have to endure. She might be a candidate, but she was also a slave. Who would believe her word over another without evidence? Winfrey saw how terrified Cara was, so she put her hands on her shoulders and repeated her question. What happened? Did the hatchling try to hurt you? She looked over Cara's front and back, and then she asked, did he unintentionally hurt you somewhere? Cara was too afraid to tell her, fearing she wouldn't be believed and that her unproven accusation would travel back to Turk. She might belong to Dragon Elder Duran, but she worried what Turk might do to her. He was very conniving and vindictive. If he so wished it, he could make anything look like an accident. She looked up into Winfrey's face. Maybe at least she could find a little solace. Cara slowly wrapped her arms around the plump woman. The worst thing that could happen was that Winfrey would refuse to comfort her. The attendant smelled of baking bread and was warm. Winfrey was caught off guard by the girl's actions. She had attended boys the last several dragon rites, and none of them had hugged her. Moved by her, Winfrey returned her embrace and stroked Cara's hair as she softly spoke. There. It had been so long since anyone had held Cara. The small joy it gave her was sweet, and yet it was also bitter as it reminded her of her wretched life. She sobbed all the more as she squeezed tightly, never wanting to let go. What happened? Why are you crying? Winfrey questioned her. You can tell me. And why was the other hatchling away from his group and over here? She glanced at Blackfire, who had already returned to his candidates. Did he try to hurt you? Please tell me, Cara, what happened here? Cara remained silent, and eventually, Winfrey gave up trying to discover the truth. Winfrey remained wary of the influence Blackfire was under to have flown so early and to have come over to another candidate's area of training. It could mean that this particular dragon rite wouldn't run smoothly, and that trouble was brewing in one of the minds of the candidates. It was a good thing that she came to Firedrake if such an odd occurrence was going to happen. Yes, it was a good thing Winfrey had come there. Along the border of the Vander Braze kingdom, the lands once ruled by King Vis, a lone shepherd watched over a flock of royal Athenia sheep by the light of the moons and the clear starry sky. He wasn't alone in his guard duty, though. 2 large droks helped safeguard the sheep. Droks were creatures similar to dragons, but they had no wings. They were about the size of an elephant, built like a grizzly bear, and were highly intelligent, but not sentient like the Athenia dragons. Droks were originally from Wyvern the Dragonlands, and then they were domesticated by the Athenia kingdom to guard the palace and other royal assets, whether property or things. The droks made for good sheepdogs and kept most of the predators away just by their presence. The shepherd had moved the flock of sheep into their current location 4 days ago, looking for greener pastures after a drought had dried up their usual feeding grounds, and they ended up an arrow's flight away from the border. They were valleys away from any town or farm in an area called the Forgotten Lands. During the war with King Vas, the lands along the border were abandoned by all those in Athenia who valued their hides. It wasn't until recently that the brave or foolhardy souls started venturing into the area again. A breeze blew about the hill country and softly wailed as the shepherd, with the help of the tan-colored Drox, herded the flock inside a cave. He had already used the cave to hold and secure the sheep the last 2 nights. The cave was small, just enough room for the 30 sheep. It had only one entrance, and it was dry inside. A traveling gems peddler spoke with the shepherd earlier that day. Wolves were common in the area, and the peddler recently heard of a pack that had been spotted in the valley 2 mountains away. The peddler warned the shepherd that the wolves had been attacking cattle and sheep and had lost their fear of man. The shepherd pushed the flock to the back of the cave. Then he built a fire near the entrance, and he sat with his back to the flock. The Drox positioned themselves on each side of him, also staring out the entrance. Later, after heating up some water in a kettle, the shepherd along with his faithful companions moved beyond the fire and sat at the entrance. He ate some lamb jerky which he shared with the Drox, and he drank a reddish, bittersweet drink brewed from red golden licorice roots. He stared at the hilly country surrounded by mountains as the moons glowed brightly, making the normally green and brown world one of pale white. All was well in his world for the moment, so he decided to relax and smoke a pipe. The night moved on, and then the shepherd and the Drox went back to the fire. He stretched out on a blanket, and they lay beside him as he continued eating the jerky and sipping on the not-so-hot drink. The wind ceased, and the area outside fell silent. The shepherd listened to the sounds within the cave, the occasional sheep baying, the panting of the Drox, and the crackling of the fire. Wolves howled in the distance, and the shepherd sat up as the Drox got to their feet. A loud noise just outside the cave spooked the flock, and a sheep ran outside. "Tom, follow," the shepherd ordered one of the Drox. Tom barked his understanding and chased after the runaway. The shepherd grabbed his staff, spear, and a torch, and then he told the other Drox, "Pat, stay." Pat whined but obeyed and sat on his haunches. The shepherd chased after Tom and the runaway, but by the time he left the cave, neither one of them was in sight. A shadow cast over the moons, and the shepherd thought it was most likely a cloud as he called out, "Tom." He heard no reply from the Drox, but he did catch sight of his paw prints and followed them, noticing the Drox was on the trail of the sheep. The wolves howled again, and then the shepherd heard the sheep scream and the Drox attack something. The fight was vicious, and the shepherd assumed Tom fought 2 or 3 wolves. The shepherd quickly made his way to the spot of the commotion, but by then all was silent. He quickly searched the area with the help of his torch and spotted the sheep. The shepherd noticed it was covered in what looked like mud, so he moved the torch closer to the sheep and saw that blood covered it. He searched the sheep for wounds but found none, and then he heard what he thought sounded like something crunching on bones and flesh. The shepherd left the sheep, continued forward, and found a large pool of blood. He followed bloody drag marks and came upon the Drox. Tom was lying down on his side with a large shadow over him. The shepherd realized the enormous shadow was gorging on Tom, and he raised his torch to see a monstrous creature. The shepherd screamed right before the beast pounced upon him. The wolves could be heard barking in the distance as the beast feasted on the shepherd. Chapter 5. Training begins and flames of discord appear. Cara was so shaken by her ordeal with the fang-bearing Blackfire that she didn't train Bold at all that day. The next day, she started his training, and all he wanted to do was eat and sleep. But as the days went by, she found she could motivate Bold to at least chase her through the tunnels if she used his food as incentive, even though she told him that she wouldn't withhold his food to train him. Every night she would take an oil Winfrey had given her and spread it all over his tiny pale body. She carefully massaged his wings, and over time, they improved. Bold grew several inches in 5 days and put on 3 pounds. It took both her hands to hold him, and she missed the palm dragon she used to cuddle. Not that she ever stopped cuddling him. Several more days went by, and Cara made him a harness to strap around his waist so that he could start training by pulling rocks. She had taken him out front by the stable when one of the boys from Turk's group approached her. She thought at first he was going to cause trouble as she imprinted her relationship with Turk on all boys, but this boy was very pleasant to her. "That is a pretty smart idea," he told her, "and he is looking stronger. His name is Bold, right?" "Yes," Cara replied, a little suspicious of him. "What are you doing here? Should you not be training your own hatchling?" "Well, Turk is very forceful about his will. He has basically frightened all the others in the group into quitting." "Does that include you?" she asked. "I do not know," he answered her as he put his hand to his ribs. "Though, I did receive a good hit from him today. I needed to get out of there for a while. He can be." He smiled as he let the rest of the words fade to nothingness, and then he held out his hand in greeting and stated, "Never mind that. "My name is Tretch." She wasn't sure what he wanted from her, but it did seem they had a common enemy. She shook his hand and said, "Cara." Tretch walked around to the hatchling as he questioned her. "Do you think you can get him to fly?" "I believe so, but I need to figure out a way to get him to use his wings first," she told him. And then she added, "The muscles of his body are improving, but he does not use his wings. You mind if I help?" he asked her. "Help?" Cara repeated as she eyed the boy. "You want to help me?" "Yes. It is not like I can do anything with my hatchling while Turk is hammering on us. And I am here in Firedrake until my patron returns. I might as well be useful." For today, you can help," Cara replied. "So, what would you like me to do?" he questioned her. She told him, "You can help me connect some rocks to his harness." With his help, they added the extra weight, and then she enticed Bold with part of his breakfast to come after her. Bold quickly got used to the added weight and came after her, and some time later, she had them take a break from their morning training and allow Bold to finish his breakfast. "Here," she called out before she threw Tretch an apple. "Eat up." He bit into the fruit and said through a mouthful, "Thanks." Cara removed some grapes from her satchel, sat on a boulder, and started popping them in her mouth. She noticed that Bold was eyeing her, so she threw a grape to him. He caught it with his mouth and ate it. Bold wagged his tail like an excited dog as he opened his mouth wide and begged for more. He likes them, Cara realized, and this gave her an idea. So she stood and blew into her whistle. He really likes them. Soon Winfrey appeared, and then she questioned Cara, "Do you need something? Is it okay for dragons to eat fruit?" Cara questioned. "They may eat fruit if they wish," Winfrey replied. "Bring me some grapes," Cara requested, and then she added, "Bring an amount that would not be too much to give to a hatchling of his size in one day. I do not want to make him sick." "I shall return shortly," Winfrey said, and then she hurried off. The day went on, and Cara and Tretch trained Bold to pull rocks by rewarding him with the grapes, and they were having a great deal of success with it. She thought she might try something else, so Cara undid his harness, raised a grape above the hatchling, and he jumped for the juicy fruit. Every time he jumped, he would flap his tiny wings. "I think this might work," she told Tretch. "I finally figured out a way to make him use his wings. I am so excited." "We are doing it, Bold. We are drawing closer to your breaking dawn." She continued training Bold and made sure not to overdo it on their first day, and as the sun set over the canyon, Cara carried the tired hatchling back to their quarters. The boy walked back beside her. "I am impressed," Tretch said once they entered the caves. "You were able to persuade him to use his wings. I have no doubt that in time he shall reach his breaking dawn." "I have always believed that," Cara told him, and then she entered her quarters and placed Bold on the sand bed. "He can do anything that he puts his mind to." Tretch parted the curtain, stood at the entrance, and asked, "You mind if I come in?" "Enter," Cara bid him, and then she went and sat on the floor at her small table. "What would you like to eat?" "I shall have Winfrey bring us something." He told her, "I do enjoy the mountain goat steaks they prepare." Cara glanced at Bold's bowl and made a face, and then she spoke. "I cannot get past what they remind me of, so I have never tried them. I shall call for the attendant now." She blew into her whistle, and sometime later, Winfrey parted the curtain and stepped in. "I have a guest today," Cara spoke up, and then she requested, "Please bring him a steak." Winfrey noticed that Cara seemed to be happier than her normal happy self, and she wondered if something good happened today with their training. She glanced at her guest, and then she wondered maybe something else happened that had made her so happy. Perhaps she has made a new friend, and perhaps the budding of something more. Cara continued, "I shall like to have that salad you made me last night and peach nectar." She noticed that Winfrey was smirking at her, and Cara wasn't sure why. She asked, "Tretch, what would you like to drink?" "Water, please, and could I get a baked potato?" "Of course," Winfrey told him. "I shall bring the food back once all of it is prepared." Winfrey exited through the curtain as she added, "I shall return with your drink shortly. If you like, I shall help you tomorrow," Tretch said after the attendant had been gone a few moments. "I would like that," Cara told him, and then she stated, "There is a game I would like to try." She grabbed a strawberry from the table's fruit basket, ate it, and then continued, "One where I toss a grape to you and Bold goes after it, and then you toss it back to me. It is a game where he shall try to take the grape away from us. It sounds like it shall be fun," Tretch told her as he broke himself a piece of bread from the loaf sitting on the table. "Should I meet you at the same place tomorrow, my lovely Dracowoman?" Cara blushed at his statement. No one had ever given her a compliment before, and she didn't know what to say in reply, so she merely answered his question, "Yes, we shall practice there tomorrow." The evening progressed as the two of them ate and laughed, and soon Tretch excused himself to return to his room. After he left, Cara walked over to Bold, who had finished his dinner. She picked him up out of the bowl, then took a damp cloth, and wiped away what was left of his dinner from his face and neck. Bold yawned and cooed as she did so. Cara leaned down and kissed him on the top of his head, and then he looked at her curiously. She hummed a song Helen used to sing to the child in her belly as she applied the oil to his pale hide, and then after she finished, she placed him on his sand bed and stroked his head until he fell asleep. Cara dragged herself to her bedroll and also went to sleep. Dragon Rite terms. Day trek, the period of time when the sun was out. Night trek, the period of time after the sun had set until the sun rose. The time when 2 of the 3 moons govern the sky. The day treks went by quickly as she and Tretch trained Bold. The hatchling's wings strengthened, and he was able to keep his body up in the air longer and longer as he reached for the grape in her hand. The first fortnight passed. None of the other hatchlings had attained their breaking dawn except Blackfire. Cara made sure to stay clear of Turk and his hatchling. She never wanted to see that snarling young dragon from the void ever again. One evening, she was restless, so she left her bed and went for a walk to clear her head of all the worries of that day, and to think about the ones tomorrow would bring. Ahead of her, she saw Tretch and Turk talking in hushed, angry tones. "I have done as you said," Tretch stated, "and I have left you in Blackfire alone. Why are you bothering me? I heard you have been helping the slave wench and her hatchling," Turk said. "That is none of your business," Tretch replied. Turk questioned him. "Do you think it shall fly?" "Yes," Tretch answered him, and then he stabbed his finger into Turk's chest as he told him, "So do not interfere with her. Bold shall one day be a great dragon." "Is that so?" Turk said. "We shall see." Cara moved on and out of earshot of the two. Tretch had come to her defense. She hoped nothing would happen to him because of it. The second fortnight seemed to go by more quickly than the first. Barman's purple hatchling, Tyrion, reached his breaking dawn, and a few days later, Cyan's blue hatchling, Sky, also attained his, so that only left Bold and the copper hatchling, Dirk, to complete the third act. One day after morning training, while they were taking a break, Cara noticed Tretch placing his forehead to Bold's. So she questioned him. "What are you doing?" "I am trying to talk to him. It is a method called mind syncing," Tretch replied. "Did you know it takes many years before a dragon is able to talk with their mouth like a human? They use their minds to communicate with each other, and they can also use their minds to talk to certain humans with mind sync. Sometimes, if you can quiet your own mind, you can hear them. Do you want to try?" "I do. What must I do?" "Do as I did," he told her. "Place your head to his and just listen." Cara walked over and placed her forehead to Bold's. The hatchling was almost as big as her now. At first, she heard nothing, but she did see images of grapes, fire drake, the sand bed, his bowl, and Tretch. She then heard what sounded like a whisper. "Not grapes. What is mine?" More images filled her mind of dragons battling each other and man, and those images felt unsettling to her. She released Bold because of the violent scenes of mayhem and the implied lawlessness of broken ties, and she almost fell backward. Tretch caught her in his strong arms, and he smiled down at her, and then she coyly smiled back. "That is amazing," she said, not really understanding what she saw. "I never knew one could try to communicate with their hatchling. I wish I had known this from the start." "Did he say anything to you?" Tretch asked her. "A few words, but I could not understand what he was trying to say," she replied. "He is still young," Tretch told her. "He might not be able to convey what he wants just yet, but with time, he shall get better with communicating with humans." Cara moved from his hold, though, for some reason she wanted to stay in his unintentional embrace. She said, "We better get back to work. I heard Dirk almost attained breaking dawn yesterday." "Once he does," Tretch started, "a time limit shall be set upon Bold. So let us get to work, and maybe we can attain breaking dawn before he does." A few days passed, and one evening, Cara woke from a nightmare. She couldn't remember it, but it had given her a dreadful fright. It was kind of like the one she had while embracing Bold's egg that she couldn't quite remember. She got up and poured herself a cup of water, and when that didn't help, she splashed water on her face. Cara walked back to her bedroll when she noticed her hatchling wasn't on his sand bed. "Bold!" She called out for him from the curtain, then left the room, and walked into the tunnel. "Bold!" She searched for a long time before she spotted the hatchling's dark figure out on one of the cliffs. It was the first cliff she had taken him to, and also where the murky black brood almost ate her. She started to walk out and call his name when the clouds that hid the moons parted, letting the smaller moon's light illuminate the sandy area. She noticed Tretch was with him, so Cara paused at the entrance of the cliff, curious as to why they were there and at that time of the night. Tretch had his forehead to Bold's. She started to walk out to them when someone came up behind her and placed their hand over her mouth, and that person forcibly dragged her away, and she could tell he was male as he grunted from the exertion. Cara struggled, but she couldn't break free of him. It seemed like he dragged her through a tunnel for a long time before shoving her into an empty room with only one entrance. Cara landed on the floor in a heap and turned and faced her abductor. Turk stood there, glaring at her. 100 horrible things went through her mind. He had warned her this day would come, and now she was alone with him. "What are you doing?" she yelled, trying to act like she wasn't afraid of him. Has it been so long that you do not remember my threat? He questioned her as he drew his sword. She stood and backed up from him as she asked with a quiver, "Are you going to kill me?" He started toward her as he stated, "I did not hunt all over Firedrake these last 3 fortnights to find the perfect hiding place only to maim you. Why else do you think I brought you here?" She lifted the whistle to her mouth, but before she could blow into it, he rushed her and snatched it from her. He punched her in the stomach, and she doubled over. Cara felt as though she would faint. "No one is going to come to your rescue," he spoke. "I am going to gut you like one of our yaks. Did you really think you could become a Dracowoman? If you cannot defend yourself against me, how do you expect to fight off one of the Stygian Legion?" Cara tried to straighten, and when she finally did, he smacked her in the face hard. She held her battered mouth as she begged him like she had begged him many times before. "Do not do this. Please, young master. Young master." He scoffed at her. "Do you still see yourself as my slave?" "No, it is only..." Cara started as she glanced around the room. There were only a few torches lighting up the dark area of her soon-to-be tomb. She admitted, "I am afraid." "As you should be," he told her as he lifted his head and looked down at her as if she were dung on his boots. He maliciously told her, "I am going to kill you." No one would be coming to save her, so if she didn't do something then. Cara reached up and grabbed a torch, and as she held it with her right hand, she swung it at him as if it was a club. Back and forth she waved the flame as hot ash fell to the sandy floor. "You want to fight me?" Turk questioned her, and then he let out a great belly laugh before saying, "I am going to enjoy killing you. I shall make sure your death is slow and very painful. I want to hear you beg for a swift end." Turk struck with his sword and knocked the torch from her unskilled hand. It fell to the floor by her bare feet and nearly burned her. He grabbed her sackcloth tunic and pulled her to him, and she placed both of her hands to his chest, trying to break free. "I shall kill you, and then I am going to kill your hatchling," he threatened her. "Did you hear me, you useless wretched wench? I am going to kill you, and then I am going to kill..." "No!" Cara screamed as she felt heat travel up her leg. Fire from the torch leapt up like a serpent and struck her left hand and his chest with its fiery fangs. The force of the blast knocked them apart. Cara was quite shaken and slowly got to her knees as she heard Turk screaming. His vest was on fire and the flames were spreading quickly. He tried to put the fire out, but the flames continued to devour the leather as if the vest had been doused in oil. She hurriedly got to her feet and dashed out of the room while she had the chance. She entered a tunnel and ran the way she believed she had been dragged from. "Help me!" she screamed. "Help me!" Cara ran, limping for some time before coming across Tretch and Bold. "What are you doing out here?" Tretch asked in an accusing manner. He looked upset and then noticed her bloody mouth. He put a hand to the side of her cheek and questioned her in a more tender tone. What happened? She was so traumatized she couldn't tell him. Tretch took her back to her room, and Bold followed along. Tretch cleaned the small cut on her mouth, and after doing so, he decided he could question her again. "Did someone attack you?" he asked as he moved his hand and gently touched her chin so he could move her face and get a better look at the cut on her mouth. Tretch demanded, "Tell me." She nodded, so he glanced at Bold, then took her by the hand, and told her, "Come. I shall take you to Dragon Elder Duran." Sometime later, Cara entered the great meeting chamber along with Tretch. Bold had stayed behind. Tretch waited by the entrance as she proceeded in. The room was huge and built within a small centuries-old dormant volcano. The floor consisted of dark lava rock, and so was a large circular table in the center, and over a dozen wooden stools were around the table. Several large tunnels entered the great meeting chamber, and she had walked through a small one. Dragon Elder Duran and one other Dragon Elder were there across the room from her. There was another dragon with them, but she didn't recognize him. A Dracoman, a courier from one of the other nests, was speaking to them. She knew he was from another nest by the coat of claws on the back of his shirt. She didn't recognize the crest, but she knew it wasn't Firedrake's. She decided that the third dragon must be with the Dracoman. What could they be talking about? Maybe she should come back later. The Dracoman looked tired, as if he had been flying all night, as he reported, "We believe one of the Stygian Legion was spotted near the border." "Are you sure?" the one Dragon Elder questioned. "Yes," the foreign dragon answered. "The warlock never crossed the skies of Athenia, but the Athenia royal army believed they were definitely scouting the area." Dragon Elder Duran stated, "This is most disturbing. It has been 5 decades since the Stygian Legion have been seen. We had hoped that they had disbanded with the death of their king. Apparently they have not. What should we do now?" the one Dragon Elder questioned. "We should..." Dragon Elder Duran started, and then he noticed Cara and the distraught look on her face, so he replied, "We shall talk about this tomorrow. Have the elders of Firedrake gather here at first light. I shall send out the call," the one Dragon Elder said. "Then if you 3 shall excuse me, I need to speak with Cara," Dragon Elder Duran stated. The Dracoman, his dragon, and the Dragon Elder walked out of the great meeting chamber. Dragon Elder Duran waited some time after they had left, and then he finally commanded, "Come here." She approached him, fearful he was angry with her. "I heard there was an incident involving you and Turk some time ago." Duran started, and then he said, "He was badly burned and he accused you of attacking him. He said that you came at him for no reason and burned him. Is that true?" Cara replied, knowing she had no proof of her words. "No, master." One of the healers examined his wound. The great yellow dragon told her. Whatever he was burned with was no ordinary fire. "Do you have anything to say about that?" Cara thought back to the torch. She wasn't sure why the fire leapt up at them or why she wasn't burnt by it. So she said in a soft voice, "No, master." Duran sighed as he looked down at her from his considerable dragon's height. He finally spoke. "I have heard complaints about Turk, how he has bullied the other candidates into dropping out. And I see no reason why you would attack him. From what I have heard, you have made every effort to avoid him in Blackfire. What puzzles me is that he said you attacked him. He gave no reason." Dragon Elder Duran wanted to hear her side. So he questioned her, "Is there anything you would like to say?" She started as she lifted her head and peered at the great yellow dragon. Would he believe her if she told him Turk tried to kill her? Why should he? She was only a slave. Cara finally said, "No, master." He knew there was much more to this, but he could only go by what he was told. So he said, "Then I shall ignore this incident, and so should you. There are more important things you need to worry about." Turk attained his Breaking Dawn today. Bold has 7 days starting tomorrow to attain Breaking Dawn, or he shall be disqualified from the next act. Do you understand? "Yes, master." "Then go get some rest. Morning shall come quickly," Duran told her. Then he started to leave and thought of something that had been on his mind for a while. And he paused. He decided now would be a good time to tell her. So he turned to her and said, "Cara, one other thing. I cannot retain you as a slave. If you cannot become a Dracowoman, I shall give you back to Bork. You would give me back." She uttered as she felt like he had plunged his large claw deep into her gut. Cara always had in the back of her mind that if Bold couldn't attain Breaking Dawn, that she would at least be able to stay in Firedrake as Dragon Elder Duran's slave. She could see herself serving the great yellow dragon and enjoying her life there. She had gotten used to the freedoms she had acquired as a candidate and believed with all her being she would, either way, be allowed to stay with Bold, Winfrey, and Dragon Elder Duran and enjoy a better life than what she had with Bork and Turk. He noticed her coloring had ashened as he continued. "I fear that we may be seeing more of the Stygian Legion. I have no need of a slave, and if you are not a Dracowoman, you would only get in the way here. If you should fail, it would be better if you return to your homeland and have the life you had before." Duran wondered why she had such a reaction to his statement. He thought she would prefer to be with her own kind, not some old dragon. Duran waited for some reply from her, and when none came, he couldn't think of anything else to say. So he continued out. Cara stood there and watched him leave as the world around her seemed to shake and collapse in on itself like a massive earth tremor splitting apart the ground. She didn't know how long she stood there, dying over and over again in her shock. It could have been hours or weeks. One of the possible lives she envisioned she would have was completely destroyed. And she was left with only one possibility. She had to make sure Bold attained his Breaking Dawn, for there was no other acceptable path for her. Cara wouldn't go back with Bork. She wouldn't go back to such a horrible life. She would rather... No, she wouldn't go back with Bork. She would. Tretch touched her shoulder, and she turned to him, realizing they were the only ones in the room. "Cara." Tretch spoke, then he saw her face, and he stated with concern, "You are white as sheep's wool. I am sorry. I heard what happened. It was a terrible thing what Dragon Elder Duran did to you. Does he really believe you would be better off going back with Turk's father than to face the Stygian Legion?" Dragon Elder Duran does not know anything about Turk or his father, or he would not have said such a thing. "Again, I am sorry for what happened." "What happened?" She questioned him as if she hadn't been there. Cara denied the whole incident by saying, "Nothing happened and nothing is going to happen." She started out of the great meeting chamber as she declared, "Bold shall fly, and I shall become a Dracowoman. I shall not go back. I would sooner die." She vowed to herself, "I shall not go back to my old life. I shall not be belittled or beaten again." Chapter 6. New Resolutions. Within the hundreds of finger mounds situated around Firedrake, Dragon Elder Duran returned to his den weary from the long day. The den was a large cave and had a huge sand bed he could sprawl out on. His den wasn't as warm as most dragons' dens were, for his den was also designed to accommodate 1 or 2 humans. Duran paused at the entrance to his den when he thought he heard the laughter of his long-past Dracoman. It made him smile, but then his pleased expression quickly vanished. He glanced at the human bed, table, chairs, dresser, water basin, pitcher, and personal articles that were reminders of glorious bygone days. Duran never had the heart to request that they be removed. but he also never had the heart to touch them or go near them. He continued into the den and went and lay down on his comfortable sand bed. Duran closed his eyes to sneak in a bit of sleep. He had set up a meeting and knew he didn't have long. Sometime later, he heard someone approach on 2 legs and knew his guest had arrived. Syllabary entered the den and searched for the great yellow dragon in the darkness as he spoke. "You summoned me." "I did," Duran replied as he stood from his sand bed and moved into a cooler section of the den. But he didn't completely go on the other side, consciously staying clear of the Dracomans things. "I need to speak to you about Cara." "What about her?" Syllabary inquired as he moved over to the table and sat in one of the chairs that hadn't seen much use in years. He noticed a few items on the table that must have belonged to the dragon's Dracoman. There was a dagger in its sheath with the firedrake coat of claws on it, a tin of polish for leather that had been left opened and dried out long ago along with a rag stained by the polish, and there was eating utensils, a plate, and a cup. Dragon Elder Duran replied as he sat on his haunches with his back to the table. "I spoke to her earlier, and I told her that if her hatchling failed to attain Breaking Dawn, I would not keep her as a slave and I would return her to Bork. I explained to her she would only be in the way here and that it would be better if she returned to her homeland and the life she had before. Why would you do such a horrible thing to a young girl who deserves much better? I thought her life with the humans would be more fulfilling than staying here with me. But her reaction to my statement made me pause, and I wondered if I made a mistake. She looked so devastated." "Of course you made a mistake, and of course she would look devastated." Syllabary snapped at him. "Sometimes I wonder if you pay attention to anything that is going on around you, and you cannot use the excuse that you are a dragon and do not understand humans. Most dragons understand humans." He started to rant more, but then calmed himself, and spoke in a more controlled tone. "Did you not see how that vile man treated her? Do you not remember the look on his face when he left? He either intends to kill her or make her wish she was dead, and you told her that you were going to send her back to that." "I see," Duran stated as he stood and took a few steps forward and away from the scribe. "I forgot about the cruelties of humans. I have forgotten, for I have kept myself away from them for the most part and have stuck with my own kind." "You do not even stick with your own kind," Syllabary said. "You are basically a hermit within Firedrake. Human companionship might do you some good. You should retract what you told Cara, and you should tell her that you shall keep her on as a slave if she fails to help her hatchling attain Breaking Dawn. If that is too much for you, give her to me as a slave. I could use someone to help me with cleaning and cooking. I tire of my own dreadful meals." Duran told him, "I shall think about it." "Do not think about it," Syllabary said, sounding angry. "Promise me that you shall not give her back to Bork. Promise me now." "As I said, I shall think about it. I do not know whether or not I want to subjugate the poor child to my company. Or yours. My company is not that bad. Yours, on the other hand." Dragon Elder Duran told him, "I would like to cease our conversation for now. I am very tired and would like to sleep." "Of course," Syllabary stated, and then he added, "Just do not take too long to decide. You should not let Cara believe the worst about her future if she should fail." Filled with distraught over her impending doom, Cara returned to her quarters and found Bold already asleep. She went straightway and lay on her bedroll and soon fell asleep amongst tears. Cara had the dream again of the grassy hill and the silvery blue oak, but this time her hatchling seemed so far away from her that she could barely sense him. He still called out to her for her to join him on the wind, but this time she had no sense of where he was in the sky. Dark clouds moved in and blotted out the sun as a thunderstorm erupted around her, and then a bolt of lightning struck the tree beside her, and she was nearly caught in its blast. She heard the voices of Bork and Turk laughing at her, and they seemed to be in the storm clouds, directing their course. Cara fled from the tree and the storm followed her as Bork and Turk continued to laugh at her. Hundreds of hands came out of the clouds, trying to seize her, but she evaded them as she continued limping away from the malicious storm. She tripped a couple of times, and the storm gained ground on her, and then when she was about to give up, Bold appeared before her on the grass. He smiled at her in his usual manner, and his presence, knowing he was there for her, gave Cara the strength to turn and face the cloud of hands, and that was all she remembered of the dream. The next couple of day treks as Dragon Elder Duran pondered his decision. Cara worked Bold twice as hard, and by then, he was inches taller than her. She trained him harder by standing on top of a boulder, dangling a clutch of grapes. Bold would leap up, but he couldn't keep his body in the air for more than a count of 6 no matter what she tried. Cara envisioned herself back in the land of the Northern Grass Plains tribe and under Bork's control. She felt the beating that was coming for her as if a phantom version of himself stood behind her while she worked through the days and lashed her with a cane, and by the end of the 5th day trek, she had had enough of the worry and frustration. While Tretch and Bold ate lunch, she excused herself and went for a walk alone. She found an isolated spot, sat, and cried. She had never cried so hard, not since that day her parents had sold her off to Bork. Cara rocked herself, trying to find comfort in her trembling arms, but all she found was despair and torment. I shall not go back, she vowed to herself. I shall not be a slave to him again. I would die first. Better yet, I shall run away. If Bold is unable to complete his Breaking Dawn, I shall run away before Bork comes. Cara continued to weep for a long time, and then she thought if she was gone too long they might come looking for her. She didn't want them to find her in this state, so she dried her eyes, started to leave, and noticed Bold. He must have been watching her for a long time, for he had a peculiar expression on his young dragon face. He stared at her with his light blue eyes as if he had heard everything she had said to herself. Do not worry, Cara told him, not wanting to concern him. She hoped he hadn't heard her, for she didn't want him to worry about her situation on top of trying to attain his Breaking Dawn. Cara told him, I am fine. I only got sand in my eyes, that is all. He stared at her as if he didn't believe her. Cara didn't know what to say, so she changed the subject by saying, You look tired, Bold. Shall we say that is enough of our noon training? Let us head back and have a long rest. She walked past Bold and then back to where Tretch was waiting. Tretch could tell she had been crying, but he said nothing about it. Cara was glad that he ignored the fact. She didn't want to have to explain or make up a reason for her tears. Cara started to say, We are going to quit for. Bold went over to her and gently grabbed her by the hand with his mouth, interrupting her. What is it? She asked as she turned to him. Bold released her hand, and then he crawled on top of the boulder she had earlier been standing on. He spread his tiny wings and flapped them twice, and then he took a couple of steps back, ran forward, and leapt off the boulder. He glided 3 lengths of a horse before he landed on the ground. Cara's eyes brightened as she realized what her hatchling had wanted to show her. Bold had hurt her, and he understood that if he didn't fly, she would be forced to return to her horrible master. She turned to Tretch and asked him, what must a hatchling do to complete their Breaking Dawn? They have to fly from one end of the finger mounds to the other. Bold is not ready. His wings do not have the strength to take him up into the air. What if he glided? She asked him with excitement. What if we can find the highest point and have him glide to the other side? There is no rule on how they complete the length, only that they have to, Tretch told her. And then he added, your idea should work. It is not my idea, Cara nearly sang as she walked over to her hatchling and hugged his neck. She almost cried again as she stated, it is Bold's. It is his idea. He is a wondrous dragon. Yes, Tretch agreed. He is a very wondrous dragon. Cara used her whistle and called for Winfrey, and then she had her show them to the highest finger mound. Cara set aside her fears and walked out to the edge, and then she glanced back at Bold and asked him, are you ready for your first flight? He walked to the edge and stood by her side as a hot wind blew over them. Cara walked back, giving him the room he needed, and then Bold glanced around the area. He didn't seem afraid at all. He actually looked nothing like Blackfire had before his Breaking Dawn. Bold leapt as he had from the boulder and glided across the area with ease. He glided the entire span and landed on the other side. Then he turned to Cara and Tretch and gave a great dragon call, and all the dragons in the finger mounds returned his jubilant cry. Cara turned and hugged Tretch as she screamed, we did it! We did it! He grinned as he hugged her back, and then he said, we did. He tightly embraced her as he spoke. Now the hard part is over. That very night there was a celebration within the Great Hall. It was the same size as the Great Meeting Chamber, but it was more bright and festive. There was no appearance of gloom and doom, and all the candidates and their hatchlings were the guests of honor. Music played and jugglers entertained as the humans sat at a long rectangular table along with a few scribes and a few other races. They all ate and drank. The hatchlings were across the way, eating their last meal from the queen. The candidates congratulated Cara on her hard work as Tretch stood in the background. Cara took her seat at the table and Tretch beside her. The celebration was jubilant until Turk entered with Blackfire. And then suddenly the room quieted down, for by then everyone knew of the animosity Turk and his dragon had toward Cara and Bold. Turk glared at Cara, and she noticed a burn mark on his chest under his vest. The old vest he had worn had been destroyed, so he wore a light brown one. The healers were unable to completely mend the wound, and it would mark him forever. Turk went and sat next to Cyan and Barman and said nothing to her as Dragon Elder Duran entered the room. Cara still feared Turk and edged her way a little closer to Tretch for protection. This feast is to celebrate the breaking dawn of each hatchling and to welcome their candidates to the next ceremonial act. Tomorrow morning, the 4th act shall occur, and the hatchlings shall pick which candidate they shall bond with. Those selected shall train to become Dracomen. He glanced at Cara. Pleased they would have their first native female rider in many decades as he finished. And Dracowomen. Those who are not selected shall return with their patron. The patrons shall all arrive by tomorrow morning. The decision of the hatchling is final. Dragon Elder Duran lifted his head and loudly roared to officially begin the celebration. And then he said, tonight, eat and make merry. Tomorrow your real work shall begin. Everyone cheered, and then they ate and drank. The celebration continued for several hours. Cara spoke to Tretch, who kept looking over at Bold. Are you excited about tomorrow? He questioned her. Yes, she told him now that she could relax and enjoy things. Cara no longer had to worry about work. She told Tretch, "My heart always thought we would make it, and now my doubting mind has finally joined with it. What about you? How do you feel about tomorrow?" She knew this was most likely the last night she would see Tretch, but she didn't want to discourage him. She told him, "There is always a chance Blackfire shall select you." "I doubt that," he said. She asked him, "Then what shall you do?" "Me?" he uttered as he pointed to himself, and then he replied, "After tomorrow's fourth act, I shall go on to fulfill my dreams." "Your dreams, what are they?" she asked, and then she stated, "I do not even know where you are from or what your people do." Turk came up, interrupting him. "We need to talk." "I have nothing to talk with you about," Tretch told him. "Go back to your seat and leave me alone. Are you still afraid of me?" Tretch glanced at her, and then he answered him, "No." He stood, and then he questioned Turk, "Where would you like to have this talk?" She grabbed Tretch's arm and told him, "Maybe you should not." He turned to her and said to her, "It shall be fine. I shall be gone for only a little while, and then I shall return." She had a bad feeling about the situation, but Cara released him. "Follow me," Turk said. "We need to finish our business." He left the Great Hall, and Tretch followed. Cara feared Turk was up to something and looked at where the hatchlings ate. Blackfire was there as well as Bold. Blackfire glanced at her when she peered his way. Whatever Turk was up to did not involve his dragon. She didn't like the way Blackfire stared at her. It was as if he knew something. Maybe he knew of Bork's plan for Tretch. Some time passed, and Tretch never returned, so she got up and went in search of him. Cara walked through a few tunnels but couldn't find either of the boys. She started back when she ran into Turk. "Looking for me?" he questioned her as he blocked her way. "No, where is Tretch?" she asked him. "What have you done to him?" He leaned to her and whispered, "I have hacked him into pieces and put him in the ground where I had planned to put you." Turk stepped back from her and waited for her horrified reaction. And then he chuckled. "Your Leman is probably back in the Great Hall." He placed a hand to the hilt of his sword as he told her, "Where you should be. Are you still going to try and kill me?" She questioned him as she glanced around the tunnel. There was nothing in the immediate area that she could use to defend herself. All Cara had were her words, so she questioned, "Do you think now that Bold has succeeded that my presence shall not be missed? And since you claimed I attacked you before, do you think that they shall not blame you for my disappearance?" Turk studied her determined expression, and then he moved his hand away from the hilt of his sword as he said, "There are other ways I can destroy your life." He paused and stepped to the side when he heard a group of boys approaching, and Cara hurried past him toward the Great Hall. "This is not over," he yelled after her. "I shall not allow you to become a Dracowoman. Mark my words, wench, you shall not taste freedom." She raced back to the Great Hall and found Tretch back in his seat. Cara was so relieved to see him and headed for her seat. "There you are. Where did you go?" he asked her. "Nowhere," she replied. Then she sat next to him as Cara remembered Turk's warning. And she said, "This is a night to celebrate, and for tonight, let us put aside our burdens from this life. I want to revel in Bold's success." Cara looked at the hatchling and her dragon peered up from eating, and he smiled at her. Blackfire looked at his rival, heard Bold's thoughts, peered at Cara, and then looked back at Bold. Blackfire gave a low growl at the other hatchling. Bold hissed back at him, and then he smiled again at Cara. She was his and no dragon, even one as big as Blackfire, would get in the way of the act tomorrow. "Yes," she told Tretch as she turned her attention back to the boy. "I want to enjoy this moment of our success. And we shall." Tretch shouted as he raised his goblet. "To our success." Cara clanged her goblet to his as she repeated his cheer. "And to the many more that shall come." Chapter 7. The Fourth Act. Cara restlessly lay on her bedroll from all the excitement of the day trek. She knew she had to get some sleep for much was happening the next day, so she closed her eyes. Cara finally succumbed to exhaustion and fell asleep. She was so happy that Bold and herself made it through the breaking dawn and would be allowed to continue through the dragon rite. She was so relieved she didn't have to run away, for she loved it at Firedrake. She loved Bold and Tretch and had grown fond of Winfrey. Cara could sleep peacefully without a care in all the world. Her mind took her to the grassy hill by the silvery blue oak where she first made her connection with Bold. The tree wasn't damaged by lightning that occurred in one of her earlier nightmares. It was untouched, and a wind gently blew its leaves. This place had a special meaning to her. No to them both. She walked around the grassy hill of her dream and touched the green blades that came up to her knees. Cara directed her attention to the sky where she knew her dragon was flying above her. Her brother in arms was close, much closer than he had been in her earlier dreams. She realized that he had matured much since then and that she was no longer dealing with a baby dragon, but a young dragon. Cara reached up her hand and felt that he reached down his talon for her. She wanted to fly in the sky with him. She wanted to ride on his back and take to the blue that had always peered down on her. And then in the blink of an eye, she was on her dragon's back. They lifted high in the sky, and she heard his strong wings beat the air as they flew. She expected that she would be terrified to be so high as she had been terrified on the cliffs. There was no fear in her heart, only trust and love. These emotions she shared with her dragon, and they would never be separated now that they had found each other. The next morning, Cara woke with a tune on her tongue. It was a melody she heard Winfrey hum on many occasions. Cara stared at the bowl of fruit on the table, craving an apple, but for the coming act, they were to have no breakfast. She woke Bold with a kiss on his forehead, and then she rubbed him down with oil so that he would look nice for the coming act. Cara did the best she could to make herself presentable, but the only clothes she had was the dingy sackcloth tunic. Cara ran a comb Winfrey gave her through her long strands of brown hair, then washed her face and arms within a water basin, and dried herself with a towel. He seemed to pay more attention to her since he first showed her that he could glide. Cara was thrilled with his new interest. It would make training a lot easier once the fifth act started. Bold moved over to her and signaled that he wanted to put his head to hers. Cara pressed her forehead to his, and she saw images of their life together. She saw herself with her arms wrapped around his egg, and that image made her laugh and cry. She had waited so long for her hatchling to come out to her those 2 days, and here he was speaking to her in his own way. Next, she saw images of her feeding Bold, bathing him, and carrying him nearly everywhere they went the first week or so. She had held him like a baby in her arms and gave him all the love she could muster. The images she saw were a mixture of hers and Bold's point of view. They had spent a lot of time together, just the two of them, and their bond was one of love, friendship, and hard work. Many more images of their time together flew through her mind, and it warmed her heart to remember each and every event. They had come so far together, and they both deserved praise for their accomplishments. No one thought they could do it, but they did. They attained breaking dawn together, and if they could accomplish that feat, there was nothing that they couldn't do. Cara finished getting them ready, and then the two of them headed for the ritual room along with Winfrey. They were nearly the last to arrive. 13 candidates and 5 hatchlings assembled in the ritual room. 3 of Blackfire's candidates had left during the night. It was rumored that Turk had a hand in their early departure. All the patrons were there as well as Bork, and they all stood in the back of the ritual room. Turk was talking to his father, and they were both glowering at Cara. Bork nodded several times as Turk explained something to him, and then a pleased expression crossed Bork's face. Cara took a step closer to Tretch, finding some comfort and protection beside his taller frame. The 4 Venetian red scribes gathered, then went and stood on the observer dais. Their convey scrolls floated in front of them, and a few of the scribes were writing. Their blazing quills seemed to set fire to their words before they were whisked away. Winfrey and the other attendants went and stood by a tunnel with a view of the middle ground. Each of them would cheer in their hearts for the candidate they had grown fond of. Dragon Elder Duran roared to quiet everyone assembled. He moved to the quickening chamber, turned and faced everyone, and then he ordered, "Hatchlings, you shall line up beside me as so. Sky, Dirk, Tyrion, Bold, and Blackfire." He waited until the hatchlings lined up, and then he continued, "One by one, you shall move forward to the middle ground, and there you shall stand in its center. And then those who are candidating for you shall join you. Any candidate may leave or join the group at any time, but no one else is permitted to step upon the middle ground." Duran motioned to the dragon guards behind him as he spoke, "These here shall ensure this rule, and they shall also not let any into the quickening chamber. So patrons, do stay in the ritual room for your own safety." His next words he directed to the hatchlings as he stated, "Your selection shall be final, so pick your candidate carefully, and once you have selected him or her, you shall mark them with a bite to their left hand. Later, after the 5th act is completed, the selected candidate's gift shall be sealed to your forehead using magic." Duran turned his head, addressing the crowd as he spoke, "Is everyone clear as to what is to happen? Good. Let us proceed. Sky, you are first." The light blue hatchling walked forward and went and stood on the round platform. He was met by Cyan and 2 other candidates. Sky went to each and circled them as he decided on which of the 3 to pick. The candidates held still with their left hand lifted, waiting for the hatchling to mark one of them. Sky was twice the size of the boys and had majestic, sleek wings. He bent and sank his fang into the middle of Cyan's hand, and Cyan cried out in pain as blood dripped to the floor. The 2 rejected candidates were quickly urged to leave by Dragon Elder Duran, and then one by one, they did with shattered hearts. Cyan gritted his teeth, and after some time, the pain lessened. He looked at his hand, and the wound magically healed, leaving what looked like a black dragon tattoo. He hugged Sky, and the dragon returned his affection, and then the 2 of them stepped down from the platform and moved to the side to watch the rest of the 4th act. Dirk came next and made his selection. Tyrion followed and selected a boy who was not Barman. Barman screamed and yelled at the hatchling and refused to leave, but with time and many harsh words, Bork was able to talk the boy down from the platform. He went and slumped down beside a wall and covered his face with his hands. Bold moved forward, and Cara joined him on the middle ground. Her heart fluttered with excitement and joy. A new life waited for her. Her brief existence as a candidate gave her only a taste of what her days would be like from now on. As a Dracowoman, she would not be bound like a slave. She would have true freedom. Cara smiled at the hatchling, and Bold gazed back at her with his usual expression. All their hard work had paid off, and all she had to do now was endure a little pain. So she lifted her left hand. Bold finally returned her smile, and he slowly moved to her. He opened his mouth, and she could see his many sharp fangs. Cara remembered how the other boys had screamed and knew it was going to hurt a lot. She braced herself, telling herself not to scream as Bold leaned in to bite her. He paused before sinking his fang into her flesh, and then he studied her stunted arm and stopped. He pulled his head back, and then he moved his head so that he was eye level with her. "This is a great day for both of us," he told her, beaming with pride. Bold surprised everyone in the room by talking, not with his mind but with his mouth. No dragon as young as him had ever done so in the history of Athenia dragons. The Venetian red scribes' blazing quills radiated as the intensity of their words flew across their scrolls. They fervently recorded this auspicious occurrence. "Today marks a new journey for both of us," Bold continued. "You Cara have come so far, farther than anyone else in this room. I do not think anyone understands just how far you have come." She was so pleased to hear her dragon's voice. She had often wished they could talk and was never able to communicate with him using her mind beyond the images he showed her. Now they were both at a level where they could express themselves beyond their actions. But if he could talk to her like this, why didn't he say something to her while they were in their room? Why did he wait until now to reveal his language ability? Cara started to say something to express her bliss-filled delight, but Bold continued before she could. "I have learned much from you as you raised me, and I have learned even more about you when you awkwardly tried to communicate with me. You might not have understood me, but I understood you and saw so much of your life. Even the last time in our room, yes, the very last time we shall ever complete a mind sync, I learned a lot about you." Cara was a bit confused by what he was saying. Did Bold mean he could see into her thoughts? Could he see into those thoughts she didn't want anyone to see? And why would he say it would be the very last time they would do so? "You were born with a useless arm and leg, and your parents could have discarded you or they could have killed you, but you survived." Bold spoke as he circled her. "Your parents did eventually throw you away and gave you up like some unwanted dog. No, that statement would be wrong. Most dogs are wanted, but you were despised and hated by those you loved. It is a cycle you cannot seem to break." From behind her, he leaned his head on her shoulder and wrapped his wings around her body as if to give her an affectionate hug. And then he stated, "I do not understand why you expect to find a family here at. I guess I am getting ahead of myself. I should finish your story first." He paused, and then he continued. "Bork took you as payment for some debt your father could not repay. Your father offered you instead of an old sow, and Bork accepted. To think your own flesh and blood father preferred a pig who was only good for meat over you. To think your father found more value in an old sow who could not have piglets." Her rejoicing vanished as a mystified horror reached up and snatched her joy away like a hawk grabbing a field mouse. She didn't know what to say or do. Cara wondered if what she was hearing even came from her beloved Bold's mouth. It had to be some sort of trick. Who would play this kind of cruel joke on her? She wanted to glance back at Bork and Turk to see if maybe they had a hand in this, but her shock immobilized her and forced her to bear witness to her hatchling's vindictive tirade a little longer. Bold snuggled his head up against hers while he embraced her in a malicious hug with his tiny wings, and then he took a deep breath, breathing in the scent of her hair. Cara always had a nice scent that had a hint of something he could never put his claw on. He always wanted to gobble her up, but he held back. Bold told her, "I do not understand why you expect to find a family here in Firedrake when no place else wants you. Why do you believe you can change your stars? Why do you believe you can be anything more than a useless wench?" "I am getting ahead of myself again. I was talking about Bork." He lifted his head and released her, then walked around, faced her, and said, "I have contemplated this for a long time, for I cannot figure out why Bork wanted you. Perhaps he thought he could use you for breeding when you became the appropriate age. Is that what you are? Are you a breeder, Cara? Your worth beyond that I cannot see." Bold sat on his haunches and was still eye level with her as he continued. "What amazes me the most is that someone like you became a candidate. I cannot figure out why one of the elders did not step in and stop you. One look at you and everyone can tell you can never be a Dracowoman." Syllabary rushed over to Dragon Elder Duran, who stood behind him on the observer dais, and he questioned the great yellow dragon. "What is going on?" "I do not know," Duran replied. "Something is not right. Something is not right with that hatchling. Should you not do something?" Syllabary asked him. "You know as much as I that no one except a candidate can step foot on the middle ground during the fourth act." Bold noticed Dragon Elder Duran and Syllabary looking his way and seemingly talking about him. So Bold repeated, I do not know what the dragon elders were thinking. Not only them but you, Cara. Do you really believe you can become a Dracowoman? Bold touched her outstretched left arm and questioned her. Do you believe you shall be able to wield a spear and shield to defend my hide? He watched her reaction, then he glanced at Bork, and then Bold said, in all fairness though, that is not what you are worried about, is it? You are not thinking of the future. You are thinking of the past. You do not want to return to your old master. He glanced at Bork again, and then Bold continued, you do not want to be subjugated to his cruelty anymore. I am digressing though. I was talking about our journey. Her face turned red with embarrassment and seemed to burn with mortified disbelief. The pale dragon, who stood before her, could not be the Bold she raised. He could not be the baby dragon she loved and cared for. And he could not be the one she placed all her faith in. They had made a promise. They promised one another that they would be there for each other. But he was. Bold was tearing her down. He was beating her with his words as much as Bork and Turk had beat her. Why would he do such a thing to her when the only thing she had ever done to him was love him? As if they were merely having a leisurely talk and not a life-devastating one. Bold stretched his wings, yawned a toothy yawn, then looked down at her, and said, if we are going to talk about our journey, we need to talk about the beginning. I heard you when you called out to me from the other side of my egg. Bold paused as he remembered back to that day, and for the first time, his face showed anger as he yelled, damn you, you cheery and optimistic wench. I wanted to stay within my egg and sleep my life away. But you persisted. You pestered with all your nagging thoughts of a better life. So I finally gave in and came out. I greatly wanted to see who had made me so many promises. I wanted to see who this great human was who would help me attain my breaking dawn. I envisioned a goddess of war with a body designed for combat. But all I found was you. I was very surprised and looked all around for the great Dracowoman who would be by my side. I nearly cried when I realized it was you. I came out of my shell for a discard of humanity. I nearly cried when I realized all I had was you. I did cry when I realized I had left my egg for a silly girl like you who did not know her own limitations. The angry expression on his face faded, and an expression that only mocked her replaced it. And then he said, after some time and sulking, I thought no matter. I could not stay in my shell forever. I had to come out, and now I could lay about and do nothing to my heart's content. But you told me you would never leave my side. I knew from that moment I had to find a way to get rid of you, or the life I envisioned for myself would never come true. Cara stated, not really comprehending what he had said to her. I never lied to you. I shall never leave your side. I shall. Stupid wench. You have not understood what I have said, have you? I do not want to become a fighting dragon. I want to be a lieabout, but that was not part of your vision. Oh, wait, I forgot about this. You even boasted there was no power in this world that would make you leave my side. I know that is not true, and I shall prove it. I shall bring about the force that shall finally rid me of you. I do not understand, Cara said. I thought you do not know me. If you had, you would have known that I was content in being a normal lazy dragon. I wanted to eat and sleep the days away. I have no desire to fight warlocks or leviathans. He looked at those gathered in the ritual room, and then he stated, Tretch did try to convince me to fight for him, but his words fell on disinterested ears. He wanted fame and glory, but I wanted a quiet life away from those who call themselves brave who in reality are only stupid. Cara was near tears, but she managed to ask, if you wanted no part in the dragon rite, why did you show me you could fly? You could have easily not shown me, and we would not be here right now. But it is the point, is it not? Do you not understand my meaning? Let me explain then. It was not until a few treks ago that I decided I would complete my breaking dawn. My body may not be strong enough yet to fly, but my body's design does allow me to glide. I have known this for almost 3 fortnights. The only reason I flew was you. Me? Cara repeated as she still couldn't fathom what he was hinting at. She stood there still frozen with her left arm stretched out, waiting on a bite that would mark her and save her life. She waited on a mark that would never come. Yes, you, Bold told her a little giddy, and then he questioned her. Do you remember walking off by yourself after our training the other day trek? Well, I followed you, and I watched as you sobbed as the pitiful creature you are. I heard in your mind that you would run away. You would run away if you could not become a Dracowoman. I thought to myself that should not happen. You had found your place in this world, and you should not run away from it. You shall become the perfect breeder, and you can provide many slaves for Bork. I knew this, so I could not let you stray from your path, and that is when I decided I would fly. To keep you on your path, I would fly. Of course, that changed my journey, and now I am stuck completing this pointless dragon rite. He sighed, thinking of the life he abandoned to obtain his revenge. And then he said, it looks like I shall not be a lazy dragon. It looks like I shall have to train and boost my magic skills to fight warlocks and leviathans. What are you saying? Cara questioned as the cavern around her whirled as much as her mind whirled in confusion. You are not that dim-witted, are you? Bold asked her, and then he said, I see that you are. If I must, then I must, so I shall explain it to you. You shall never become a Dracowoman. Bork is going to drag you from this room and return you to your proper station in life. You shall become a breeder. Bold moved closer to her. Then he rubbed his head up and down her body below her belly button as he told her, Soon men shall start to touch you like this. Stop it. Cara yelled as she shoved him away from her. He laughed at her appalled reaction to his cruel betrayal and her confused outrage. Bold told her, maybe Bork shall father a few of the children himself. Would you like that? He hissed his delight as he spoke. You shall be his bitch. Maybe Turk shall come for a visit and help himself to you. And you can be his bitch too. Would you like that? I think you would, but more importantly, do you understand? Is everything clear to you now? Where once you thought I was the one who would be cast off. But now I cast you off. I cast you off because of your weakness and your uselessness. Be gone from me, wench. You shall not be my Dracowoman. You are abandoning me. Cara said as she finally broke down and cried. You are casting me off. All I did was love you. All I did was accept you as you were and believe you could be anything you wanted to be. I wanted to be a normal dragon, Bold told her. Have you not been listening? Is that it? Cara questioned him. Are you doing this out of fear? Do you believe I shall stop loving you because you wanted to drop out of the dragon rite? She peered at him with a heart-sick expression as she told him, I would not have stopped loving you because of that. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she told him, if you had told me, if you could have somehow communicated with me your wishes, I would have been greatly disappointed because of my own predicament and tried to convince you otherwise, but I would never have stopped loving you for that. You lie, Bold stated angrily. You would have hated me as much as you hate me now. Not that I care one way or another if you love me. What use do I have for love? I shall be a terrible fighting dragon and shall one day die fighting a warlock. I would have, Cara insisted. I would have continued to love you even as Bork dragged me away from Firedrake and all those I love here. But now, she sobbed some more before continuing. Now the love I have for you. It is. She didn't want to say such a dreadful thing as I hate you even if Bold deserved to hear it. So she let that thought drop. And she asked him, do you really hate that I wanted to consider you family? Do you really hate? Cara couldn't speak anymore and wept bitterly. From his spot on the observer dais, Syllabary asked Dragon Elder Duran, can we really stand here and do nothing? The actions of this hatchling are unprecedented. In the history of the scribes, I have never seen a hatchling act this way. There has to be something wrong with him. His behavior is unbecoming of an Athenia dragon, but we must bear witness only. Duran told him, the dragon guards shall attack any who step on the middle ground who are not candidates even if it were I who did so. The great yellow dragon looked at those in the ritual room, and then he spoke. Maybe one of the candidates shall help her. We cannot interfere, but they. Back at the middle ground. You would not have loved me, Bold insisted. You would have pushed and forced me to continue the dragon rite. Using the love you believe is between us. You should know that we are not attached in any way. I care nothing for you, you stupid useless wench. After Bold assaulted her with his words and his vulgar actions, she stared at him in utter dismay. The world she had envisioned for herself was burning to the ground around her. She was so unsettled, Cara was unable to answer his accusations. Bold whirled with the sensation her sheer humiliation brought him. He waited for this day trek for so long. Bold studied her trembling outstretched arm, and then he told her, how dare you hold that feeble thing towards me? It repulses me. You repulse me. To think you would dare dream of becoming a Dracowoman. Are you stupid? You are definitely wretched. Go back to your master, wench. Unlearn your name for you shall never hear it again. He paused, and then he added, today I am going to demoralize you, and you are going to beg for an end to my words, but that shall not happen until I have heard what I have come here to prove. Cara realized she had placed all her hopes and dreams in a being she truly didn't know. Who was this young dragon standing before her? She knew nothing of his mind or his heart. How could she be so wrong about him? And how could he say such evil and cruel things to her? She raised him and loved him. Why did he have such harsh feelings toward her? Did she do something to him? Was there a reason for his hatred other than her existence? How could he? No. She had done nothing wrong. Cara gave him a place in her heart, and she cared and nurtured him. There was no reason. The heartache she felt turned to anger, and then that anger turned into rage as she whispered, no. Cara stepped toward Bold and shoved her arm in his face as she demanded, you shall mark me, you ungrateful hatchling. Her eyes reddened with her ravaged hopes as she declared, I shall become a Dracowoman. You shall mark me, and I shall become a Dracowoman. You said it yourself. You must select a candidate. Mark me and let us forget about this nonsense. You cannot mean all that you have said. Mark me and. Tretch moved forward as if on cue. He walked up the steps to the platform of the middle ground as if he were a prince coming to be crowned king. And then he moved forward until he stood beside her. Cara peered at him as a revelation swept over her that seemed to grab hold of her like an undertow. The revelation dragged her under a sea of conspiracy as points in time became clear to her. Bold wasn't the only one who had planned to betray her this day trek. She had been stupid. Cara lowered her arm, surrendering to her brutal reality. From the moment Tretch befriended her, he had a plan. And he planned on taking her hatchling away from her. Tretch lifted his left arm toward Bold, confirming her worst fears. She felt ill as if she would throw up. How long had the two of them planned this? Tretch had been so kind to her as he helped her, but he was only helping himself. He wanted Bold to fly for he would become his dragon. Did you plan this from the start? She asked Tretch. Or was it something that came to you later? Was all the time the three of us spent together? Was it all a lie? Tretch didn't answer her. He didn't even give her enough consideration to look at her. A horrible thought crossed her mind, and she glanced back at those in the ritual room to the son of Bork. Was that what Turk meant? Did he know that Tretch was going to take her hatchling away from her? She stared at him with a look of terrified understanding. And Turk smirked back at her. He did. Turk knew all along, so Tretch had planned this from the beginning. She should have realized what the boy had been up to. Why else would he want to help someone like her? Why else would anyone want to help her? He had done this to her. Tretch had. She turned back to Bold, knowing she couldn't blame Tretch for this. It seemed like Tretch was being used as much as she was. Tretch couldn't have planned all of this. The one behind it was Bold. If her hatchling had cared for her and really relied on her, Bold wouldn't betray her. Bold was the one who despised her for some reason she couldn't fathom. How could she have not known how he felt? Did he hate her from the moment he came out of his shell? Did she really disappoint him with her feeble self to the point of making him cry? All that love and devotion she gave to him, did he ever return it? When she kissed him or hugged him, did he ever return her affection? Cara started to ask, did you? Are you wondering if I hated you this entire time? Bold interrupted her, and then he honestly replied, no, I did love you, and in a way, I still do. I am not completely heartless. You did care for me when no one else wanted a frail thing as myself. You believed in me when everyone else thought I was a failure. Then why? She questioned. Bold replied, the answer is easy for you to see. I hate your very existence. You see, like me, you were born imperfect but unlike me. You believe there is nothing that you cannot do and that you have no limitations. Many have tried to show you your error, but you have ignored them. I shall not be ignored. This all goes back to your fears, does it not? Cara accused him. Fear of what? Bold questioned her. Fear of dying. I already admitted that. Fear of being stuck with someone as useless as you. I have already tried to explain that to you. No, she answered. You are afraid I shall cast you off. You are afraid that I shall stop loving you for some reason. I already told you that would not happen. I shall always love me. Is that what you are going to say? Bold questioned her as he laughed at her. Even after everything that I have done to you this day, Trek, are you going to stand there and tell me you still love me? You cannot love me. You do not know the half of what I have thought about you. You only know a minute part of the things I wish to do to you. Tears seemed to weld up in his light blue eyes as he stated, so do not dare say that you love me, for I know it is a lie. There is a darkness within me. A darkness that devours love and destroys all things good around it. You cannot love me, for if that were true. If that were true. He stared at her for a long time, and Cara thought she saw a glimpse of regret in his eyes. She wanted to step forward and wrap her arms around him and tell Bold that she forgave him, that it didn't matter what he had said out of fear or self-loathing. She would forgive him and they could still become a team. Cara took a step forward to fling herself upon him, and he must have sensed what she was about to do or heard it in her thoughts, for Bold retreated a few steps. Bold closed his eyes, and when he reopened them, they were no longer torn between two paths, but set on one. And he stated, we have greatly strayed from the topic. I told everyone about our journey. I told you I shall not be ignored. And I shall not let you ignore your limitations any longer. Your stubborn blindness ends today. He moved around her, snapped his head forward, bit Tretch on his hand, placing his mark on him. And then he declared, your fate is sealed. Bold turned and faced her as he declared, I have sealed it with my own fang. Chapter 8. The candidates have been selected. Bold's atrocious words echoed through Cara's mind until they hit the very core of her soul. First, he humiliated her, then he tore down her spirit, and finally, he sealed her fate to one of misery and loneliness. She stared at her beloved hatchling, not knowing what to say or do now that it was all over. Bold peered at her all giddy, waiting on her reaction. It was as if he dared her to tell him how she hated him now. He dared her to declare the truth for all to hear. She had to hate him now. She had to despise him with all of her heart. Say it, Bold finally spoke. Tell me how you love me now. Tell me how you shall never leave my side. Tell me that you shall always be there for me. He moved over to her and wrapped his wings around her shoulders as if they were hands. And then he beseeched her, go ahead. Call me your brother in arms. Her unyielding spirit had been dashed, and her will to live had been sucked out of her. So Cara stood there like an empty doll. Her body felt heavy as her soul did. Did he understand what he did to her? Did he understand that this wasn't a game and that he had doomed her to a horrible life? Say it, Bold urged her as he was inches from her face. Tell me, you broke my heart, Cara whispered to him, giving in to his demands. She wanted this done, so she relinquished her dreams and aspirations to his brutal will. You made me feel anger towards you. Please let us stop this now. It is enough. I do not want to hear any more. I shall not stop until I have heard it from your lips, he told her. I do not want to hear about your anger. I want to hear what your love for me has become. I want to hear the word, so say it. She gave in again and murmured, I hate you. Are you satisfied now? I hate you. Bold released her and took a few steps back from her as if she struck him with a devastating blow. She didn't understand why he would be overwhelmed by the very thing he wanted to hear. Maybe this was an act. Maybe his performance of being wounded by her declaration was just that. A performance. He had set the stage, gathered the actors, wrote the script, and now they performed the tragedy. What more was left? Was there anything unsaid? I told you, Bold hissed at her. I told you I would demoralize you and make you beg for an ending. I have proved what I set out to accomplish, so my time with you has come to an end. I truly cast you off now. I cast you off to the life you were meant to live. I cast you back to the life you should never have had aspirations of leaving. Cara realized her misery wasn't at an end. Dragon Elder Duran told her he would give her back to Bork. She thought the world around her which had been destroyed couldn't be devastated any further. But she was wrong. It could be burned, it could be turned to ash. Cara's heart sunk deeper into despair as the life of a breeder flashed before her eyes. She turned and glanced at Bork. He must know that Dragon Elder Duran would give her back, for he had a victor's expression on his face. Another tear trickled down her cheek. With his true nature reveal, Cara didn't want to bond with Bold any longer. He had been right. Her life as a Dracowoman was only a dream. A foolish dream. She was frustrated, afraid, and infuriated. Cara turned to Duran, who looked on at her from his lofty position on the observer dais. He appeared perplexed and sorry for her predicament, and at that moment, there was no one else she could think of to blame. So she directed her anger at him. How could you? She shouted at the great yellow dragon. Did you do it for my benefit or for your own? Why did you have me drop the bloodstone into the bestowal basin? Why would you put me through all this hardship? Tears streamed down her face as she turned and glared at Bork as she realized he was also to blame. Cara shouted at him, I should never have been brought to this place. You should have left me behind. She faced Duran and the other dragon elders and told them, letting me think there was hope where there was none was crueler than anything my master ever did to me. Why did you let me taste freedom only to steal it away from me in the end? Why would you do that? Damn girl, quiet your vile mouth. Bork snapped at her. And then he moved for her but stopped before stepping on the middle ground. He ordered her, come here. No, I shall not go back with you, she screamed. Cara knew she was safe from him as long as she remained on the platform. She started backing up to its center when she felt something ram into her back. Cara glanced over her shoulder just as Bold rammed into her again with his head. She stumbled forward several feet. You should not keep your master waiting, Bold told her as he charged at her again. Bork may want to copulate with his bitch now. Her body went airborne, and she landed hard on the sand below the platform. She was on the other side of the middle ground opposite of Bork. Cara knew she had no time to be hurt or afraid, so she forced her shaken body to rise to her feet. Cara turned and limped for the quickening chamber. Bork rushed after her, but the dragon guards moved to block his entrance into the quickening chamber. Let me by. Bork yelled at them as his slave managed to elude him. They shall not let you by, Dragon Elder Duran told him. Step back from them and do not test their resolve. Turk! Bork shouted as he took a few steps back from the dragon guards. Go after her. Yes, father, Turk replied and then rushed after her from his spot in the ritual room. Cara had made it to the exit by then and hurriedly entered a tunnel. And then she left the quickening chamber. She hoped in the confusion that she could escape before Bork grabbed hold of her. All she could think about was the cliff with the yellow-brown sand, the one where that murky black brute terrorized her, the same cliff where she witnessed Tretch and Bold bonding. It would be a fitting place to end her life. It was a place where she had been met by rage and treachery. If she could make it to the cliff, she could jump to her freedom. It was high enough. She could jump to her freedom. She entered another tunnel and then another, desperately trying to throw off any who pursued her. She had enough of a head start that maybe no one would be able to catch up to her before she flung herself out of this world of misery. Where are you, wench? She heard Turk yell at her, but it sounded like he had gone through a different tunnel than the one she was in. When I find you, I am going to put you in your place once and for all. She continued her desperate stride, knowing she was nearly to her destination. Black fire, Turk shouted, "Come to me, my dragon. I need you. I need you to get the wench. Do not let her escape." Blackfire gave a great dragon scream before she heard him leave the quickening chamber and charge after her. The murky black hatchling was huge now. He was already a third of the size of an adult dragon. Cara increased speed as she heard him rumble across the floor in one of the tunnels like a stampeding herd of yaks. Blackfire tracked her by her scent and found the tunnel she limped through. She screamed once she saw him and increased speed. But it was too late. He grabbed her with his front talons, and she screamed again as he flew them out of the tunnel and into another. She heard his wings flapping and her own heart thundering in her chest. The cool air swiping her face warmed as they neared an exit. Black fire flew out and circled the finger mounds as the sun climbed past a quarter of the sky, and then after a few moments, he headed for a different cliff than the one Cara intended to flee to. It was one of the huge ones. He dropped her to the sand, and then he landed himself some distance from her. Blackfire turned and thundered toward her with his mouth wide open. Cara covered her face with her arms and let out a cry. She would meet her end by dragon teeth and claws. Her death wouldn't be swift as she had intended to end it, but it would be long and filled with pain just as her life had been. The end. Next, AabiLynn's Dragon Rite number 2.